Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. I'd like to call us to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Dabala.
Present.
Councilmember Kostick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Present.
All right, thank you all. No changes to our agenda this evening. Looking at the 4 weeks to come, next week is February 16th, and we'll begin our meeting with a public hearing on our redistricting plan, and then 2 work sessions, discussion of redistricting options and a draft ordinance. And then the other work session is on the American Rescue Plan Act spending and a budget amendment draft ordinance there as well. So those will both be work sessions. And then the following week on Wednesday, the 23rd, we are going to begin our meeting at 6:30 with a presentation from a graduate student on evaluation of impacts from climate change on the existing stormwater infrastructure in the city. Then at 7:30, we will have a proclamation for Invasive Species Week, which is February 28th to March 4th. A public hearing on traffic calming requests on 4th Avenue, Glenside Drive, Prince George's Avenue. And then we have a legislative update followed by our
recording in progress.
Following by our voting session, which is the first reading ordinance approving the ARPA spending plan and budget, and then a first reading ordinance adopting a redistricting plan. Our work sessions that night are a presentation of pavement condition report, traffic calming requests on 4th Avenue, Glenside Drive, Prince George's Avenue, and coming back to the Reimagining Public Safety Review and Action Plan by the City Council. And then on Wednesday, March 2nd, we'll start our meeting at 7:30. Tentatively, we have presentations by the Police Chiefs Advisory Board, review of the Reimagining Public Safety Report, and the Police Department Annual Report. Our voting session that night will be the second reading ordinance approving the ARPA spending plan and budget amendment, and the second reading ordinance adopting a redistricting plan. And we'll have the first reading ordinance of the traffic calming on 4th Avenue, Glenside Drive, and Prince George's Avenue. And that takes us into March. The next item on our agenda this evening is adoption of minutes. We reviewed the minutes from our November 3rd meeting, as well as the November 7th meeting that the council held with the State Highway Administration. Would someone like to move the adoption of both of those minutes? Councilwoman Kostick moved, Councilmember Siemens second. Any discussion or changes? Okay, not seeing any. Will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala.
Present.
Councilmember Kostick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Great. Now we're going to move our legislative update. We're going to start moving that before public comments and ask Ann Seacott and Suhani to join us, because we know you all have very long days, and we realize I'm sure you want to get off your computers as soon as you can. So if you wanted to give us a quick update on how things are going in Annapolis.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Good to see everybody. We're rolling along. We have seen a deadline come for the introduction of Senate bills. The deadline for House bills is the end of the week, so we're still expecting quite a few more House bills. Just of interest process-wise, next week, the Senate of Maryland will start in-person bill hearings and budget hearings. So to weigh in on Senate bills, with verbal testimony, without some special exception. They've got a couple of categories for special exceptions. Folks will have to come to Annapolis. So we'll be doing these meetings probably from Annapolis starting next week. And wanted to just let folks know, like, we're starting to see some of the high priority bills for Tacoma Park. Delegate Charkoudian's Safe Streets bill. It's not called Safe Streets, it's SAFE, the pedestrian safety bill. I'm sorry, the state highway bill and all. So also Just Cause bill from Janelle Wilkins, that was introduced to yesterday, I think. So, we're seeing some of those bills be introduced. I wanted to do a couple quick follow-ups to questions that were raised last week. Councilmember Smith, you asked about the broadband equity bill, and that has been introduced, House Bill 918. It does not have a hearing scheduled yet, so we promise to keep you informed on that. And then I know that there were questions about a lot of the federal money coming in, especially with regard to infrastructure. And lo and behold, not only are we going to be monitoring all of that through the budget hearings, but there's a bill to also take a look and really and try to establish a more formal process of oversight for where all of that, where the money's going, where the projects are going. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that as well.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? Terrific. Thank you so much for all your work on this. I appreciate you giving us the update. So next we will now move on to public comments. First, our public comments on voting items. Our only voting item tonight is the second reading ordinance approving our FY22 budget amendment number 3. Ms. Carpenter, I don't see Ms. Michui.
No, she has not joined us.
Okay, so we'll come back to see if she is. I do see Mr. Gagliardo is with us, and so we will turn it over to him to kick us off for public comments on other matters.
Hi, good to see all my friends and neighbors, even though some of you are cursed to be in public office. I bring you greetings from Census Block. I don't know what the heck census block I'm in. I don't know its name or the number or anything else that identifies it, but greetings from my census block. This leads me to ask, did the consultants you hired draw maps consistent with the criteria you promulgated? And at some point in the meeting, I would like you to answer that question, not just by yes or no, but with some thought. And was it worth it? Was it worth whatever you authorized them to be paid? You have my written comments. You've heard me say this before. So let me just leave tonight's comments on with the following. Please draw the ward boundaries that respect neighborhood boundaries. Do the hard work, get it right. Okay? Thanks, friends.
Okay, next we have Ferd. Is Ferd with us? Yep, there he is.
Yeah, hi, good evening. I'm Ferd Hefner, live on Montgomery Avenue in Ward 3. Lived in Tacoma Park for 39 years, and I'm an elder at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church. Just want to make 2 points tonight. First, I want to call your attention and the staff and community's attention to the letter that council received this afternoon from 215 Tacoma Park residents. You received this last week too, but now nearly 60 additional people have signed on in just the last few days. As you know, the letter supports spending the lion's share of federal ARPA dollars on meeting the most urgent human needs brought about or intensified by the pandemic. Relative to the request in the letter, I think it's fair to say that you took some significant steps forward last week and also some steps backward at the work session last week. We remain hopeful that you will do the right thing and further improve support for low-income residents, including increased direct cash assistance in your deliberations later tonight. Which brings me to my second point. You all hopefully have had a chance to at least briefly review the memo I sent to the council over the weekend on the topic of direct cash assistance. I hope it dispelled any notion that might be out there that this cannot be done or is too difficult. It is neither. Many jurisdictions are doing it. In fact, some have already completed their initiatives to get cash into people's pockets for use for rent, utilities, childcare, healthcare, distance learning, and all the rest. There is no question that direct cash assistance is feasible for the city of Tacoma Park. We can do this. In fact, from a moral point of view, we must do this, as urged by the letter you received from 10 area clergy and faith leaders, including Tacoma Park Presbyterian, Tacoma Adventist, the Jewish Renewal Community, St. Camillus, Grace Episcopal, Church of the Ascension, Seekers, and Christ Congregational Church. City staff has estimated the cost of direct cash assistance at $2.35 million. We urge you to not leave your meeting tonight without having found a way to increase the allocation for immediate direct cash assistance to at least $2.35 million. As I understand it, you are already at $1.5 million, so this would mean at a minimum finding an additional $850,000 with some adjustments within the line item you're calling social service partnerships and some additional adjustments in the overall package. This target can be met. We remain hopeful that you will do the right thing and improve income support for low-income residents, and that you'll leave tonight with at least $2.35 million in direct one-time direct cash assistance within an expanded social service partnership line item. Thank you for your serious consideration of that proposal.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Sue Miller.
Good evening. I'm Sue Miller and I live in Ward 3. My ward, Ward 3, has a strange, elongated, apparently gerrymandered shape. It's always seemed vaguely sketchy to me. How it got that way may be lost in the mists of time, but it doesn't really matter. What matters now is that every 10 years we have a chance to do better. And this year we can do better by adopting Map B based on the guidance in our charter on creating compact wards that respect natural boundaries. In Map B, Ward 3 is compact. It conforms to the natural watershed. It conforms to major roadway boundaries. And Map B closely resembles the map created by Arthur David Olson using objective algorithms to balance the wards. So objectively, Map B is a better choice. Unfortunately, there have been some statements about supporting Map A because it keeps the interests of a current ward together. But this is a logical fallacy based on circular reasoning. If we make few changes to the boundaries, as in Map A, it will by definition keep the interests of the current ward together. But that does not mean Map A is a better map. Unfortunately, the most obvious reason to choose Map A is that it will make it easier for incumbents to get reelected. And choosing a map to help incumbents is prohibited by our charter. So we find ourselves in an ethical pickle here because somehow the council is choosing the map rather than the residents. And residents do not even know council's intentions on whether or not they are running in the fall. So if you're planning on moving on from city council in the fall, choosing the more logical map, Map B, should be painless. What I would urge you not to do is quietly plan to step down from the council in the fall and vote to leave us with a gerrymandered map, Map A, for another decade. And the other thing that you really cannot do ethically, and according to our charter, is choose the gerrymandered Map A in order to make it easier for some council members to get reelected. So option B is both the better choice and the ethical choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Next, we have Emmanuel Wagner.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Was that me?
Yeah, you're good. You're
Okay,
good.
sorry. Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for the time. Just a couple of really quick things. Regarding the ARPA budget, one of the things that I did not see, which I would welcome an opportunity for the city to consider, is to provide some funding for educational after-school programs for kids to make up for the loss that they undoubtedly had over the last years now due to remote learning, especially for low-income kids and families that have a hard time to make up the gap in learning that occurred during this time. We'll welcome that to be one of the line items to take a look at. Second, I do want to just bring this up. The recommendations from the Complete Safe Streets Committee from 2020 and 2021 that looked at recommendations for traffic calming and for sidewalk prioritization. There were a number of activities and recommendations that we've developed. Would love to for the council to follow up on that with city staff on the status of the implementation of those recommendations, as well as the limitation or the reduction of the speed limit in city streets and on residential city streets to 15 miles per hour to avoid some of the traffic calming and speed bumps discussions that are on the on some of the future agendas for the council. Take a look at that in those recommendations and see if that can be prioritized and implemented. And then lastly, I know it's a tricky subject, but we have this decision by the county council, by the county planning board that rejected the lay-by and the NDC project. Please work with NDC on a new proposal that addresses some of the concerns that SHA had. It seems like this is a partnership between NDC and the city. I know a lot of residents want to see development at that site. Maybe not exactly what was proposed, but continue to work with NDC to find a solution for that site. It would be sad if we continue to just have a parking lot with not much else. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Next, we have Miss Mary Jane Machui.
Hello?
Hi, Mary Jane. Can you?
Ask you to start your video. I think I can hardly read this. Okay. Thank you.
There you go.
Fortunate I can even go this far. There are other people, mostly older seniors, lower income seniors who can't even go this far. Can't even get into Zoom. And I have difficulty getting to Zoom, but at least I got in with your all's assistance. I've lived in Ward 2, 404 Boyd Avenue, my son and I, for over 37 years. And we've seen a lot of changes, and most of them I don't like. The second is thank you, Mr. Fox, for talking with me a few days ago. A lot of you have spoken with me, but I started Parents of Special Needs Adults in July 2015, and nothing has been done, really. Housing is a major issue. Today, I'm so depressed, I can hardly walk out of my house because I don't know what's going to happen to my son when I can't be with him anymore. He has no one else. And I'm sorry for begging, but I'm not a millionaire. And when you have a special needs adult, especially because when they're adults, nobody wants to have to deal with them. Pretty much all my little family that have has deserted us. They don't want to help him at all. I'm trying to get a special needs trust drawn up, but I can't afford a regular one because you have to have $500,000 at least for that. You all don't understand that the money is needed for this. You think you get government money handed to you. No, you don't. And I've been fighting with the Developmental Disabilities Administration for years. And I'm sorry, it's not fun, and I'm sorry for complaining. But anyways, well, you all have a good evening. And I apologize. I'm sorry for the bomb threats. I know I'm a harbinger of bad ill, but I think there is, like Representative Kissinger said, I think there is a civil war. It's going to happen in this country. And I think the white supremacists want to start it, trying to start it. And I'm sorry this is happening, but I think they're trying to, that's what these bomb threats, a lot of have been about. Anyways, sorry about that. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Machui. Those are all the public comments for this evening. We'll now move on to council comments, and as just as a reminder, council has 3 minutes as well to provide their comments. Who would like to kick us off? Let's see. I have Councilmember Siemens and then Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to take a minute since Monday is going to be Valentine's Day. I've got my sign up a couple days early just because this is when we're on. But I just wanted to wish all of my peeps out there a happy Valentine's Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
I just want to first thank all the residents that spoke today. I appreciate the comments that Ferd made. He seems to be a moral voice of the council. I think the proposals that he's made are reasonable. It's something that I hope all my colleagues consider. I had the opportunity to talk to some students at Notre Dame University in Indiana today. Thank them for their great questions. And I also thank some of my colleagues for the opportunity. And I would ask staff that there was an inquiry from Ms. Campbell. I would ask that you could look into it and respond to her email. Thank you very much.
Okay. See, Councilman Costick.
Good evening, everyone. Just a couple of quick things. First of all, thank you very much to all the residents who spoke this evening. We'll be getting into a little more in depth our discussions of redistricting and ARPA later this evening. But just want to say thank you. The ongoing conversations on both of these topics have been extremely helpful, and everyone's feedback has been very useful in considering how we move forward on these topics. 2 updates from a couple of meetings over the last week. The first is a meeting that Councilmember Kovar and I and some of the city staff were attending last week, organized by the ANC commissioner, related to a development on the DC side on Laurel Avenue, the former Strayer building along Laurel and Eastern. They are moving forward with the development there. Douglas Development is developing that property, and we learned a little bit more about what that will look like. For residents in Takoma Park, it's very nearby and will likely have an impact on kind of the look and feel downtown. So just want to make sure people are aware of that. It's looking to be a building with about 350 apartment units, and they are looking to begin demolition as early as next month. So we can be looking towards that, and appreciate the focus of city staff on making sure that you're kind of keeping in touch with what's happening there and can give updates. That's been extremely helpful. And then also had a sidewalk meeting with the Director of Public Works last night for Sligo Mill Road. They are looking at a sidewalk request. Really appreciate the work of Public Works and the residents there and in moving this forward. It's a location that does not have a sidewalk and has a lot of traffic going through at a relatively large, fast speed, and has a lot of young kids and young families there. So really would like to see a sidewalk project move forward there in the future. And that's it from me tonight. Happy Valentine's Day, as Councilmember Siemens said.
Great. Next we have Councilmember Kovar and then Searcy.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks to everybody who came out to speak. And we will be talking about, as my colleague just mentioned, ARPA and redistricting momentarily. So we'll get into all those questions. A few other things I wanted to mention. One, we did just approve the minutes, and that included the minutes from our meeting with the State Highway Administration last year. And I think it would be helpful if we could have a follow-up summary on some of the things that the State Highway Administration agreed to do in that meeting. And I say that just because in looking through the minutes, I noticed one of the things was we had called to their attention the damaged guardrails along Philadelphia Avenue on the hill between Piney Branch and Tacoma Avenue. And they said they would get on it right away. And it looks like a few improvements have been made, but there's still some damaged guardrails along there. And I'm not sure about a lot of the other things that were in that, in the minutes for that meeting, but I think that's a safety concern for kids going to school, et cetera. So if we could follow up on that and any other things that they agreed to do that they haven't yet done. Secondly, people are probably aware of this, but the Midwinter Play Day led by Let's Play America is coming up on Sunday, this Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. The plan is to do it in person, given the drop in cases of the coronavirus. That seems like that would work. So it's at the community center on this Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. There'll be indoor and outdoor activities there. I do want to mention on the DC development project that Councilmember Kosick just mentioned, the one thing I think would be really useful, and maybe the staff can follow up separately on this, with the construction project happening in North Tacoma, we did agree with the construction company and the college to a series of construction protocols relating to hours of work and noise and some of the other things of that nature. Now, this is a little more complicated because it's the district and it's not us, but it's literally right across the street from the church in Old Town, catty cornered from the pizza movers. And so we're as affected as the people in the district will be when it comes to the impact of the construction. So I'd ask the staff, and I'm happy to talk about what we did with regard to Montgomery College, if we could reach out to the DC folks and see if we can collaborate with them on that. And then one other thing I just wanted to mention, I did hear from a member of the task force we established on the nuclear-free committee issues and also sustainable banking. They would like to have a modest extension of the amount of time that task force will be in operation. So we'll put that request in form. I think it's for another month or so. And lastly, with the protests in Canada and so on, I would like to hear at some point from our police what we're doing to coordinate regionally on those topics so that we're prepared for that as a city. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar, sorry, is the task force going to put in a formal request?
I think I believe they may have sent an email or going to the city clerk. I was told it in a conversation, and I think they said there was an email, but I'm not sure if it was sent or would be sent, but if it hasn't yet, it will be soon. So thank you.
I'll check with the city clerk to make sure that if we need to vote on it for an extension, that we get it on the agenda. Councilman Searcy.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to all of those who provided comments tonight. Your feedback continues to be helpful as we're tackling the challenges associated with trying to obligate a finite amount of money to cover so many pressing city needs. So thank you so much for the letters and the feedback. 3 quick things. First and foremost, we have a start date for construction of the Hillwood Manor Playground. I know, right? So the stormwater work will begin on February the 15th. Just as a reminder to folks, we got to deal with the drainage issues for that area before we can actually have the new playground equipment installed. And the playground is anticipated to be replaced on May 1st. So we have to get through with all of the drainage and stormwater work, and then the new playground equipment will be installed. So hopefully we'll have an entirely new playground area for Hillwood Manor before the peak spring, summer season, so the kids can enjoy the new space. We also will have Washington gas work that's happening near 7316 New Hampshire Ave. That will start on Monday. It will happen at night from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. They're anticipating it'll be about 5 days. However, Public Works thinks that they may be able to get done with the work a lot sooner. Public Works Department is meeting with Washington Gas Contractor around the work so that we can get a better understanding. But I do want to just make sure that folks know that that will be happening. Door hangers should be placed on the doors of residents that are near that area. So to just make you aware of what's happening. And again, the Public Works Department is meeting with folks on Friday. So more information to come on that work that will start on Monday. And then lastly, regarding redistricting, I've heard from residents in the Kentland Larch neighborhood that are interested in us having just a Zoom call to kind of talk about any concerns that you all might have around transitioning. So I will send out a meeting invite later this evening or first thing tomorrow, just to talk to you all about any concerns that you might have or your thoughts, and just make sure that folks kind of understand what's happening in terms of redistricting and how it will impact your community. And I finished with 30 seconds to spare. Thank you all so much.
Great. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands up. A couple of things. I testified last week on behalf of the city for the Vision Zero bill regarding requiring SHA to do an analysis of intersections where there is a fatality. We are putting in testimony, and we'll testify on Delegate Charkoudian's bill next week regarding SHA. This week, we convened the mayors of Montgomery County. We meet once a month, and this month we had Vice President of the County Council, Evan Glass, come and talk to us about Vision Zero. We already talked about Play Day, and then today was the COG board meeting, and our focus was on housing, looking at the housing target updates regionally, as well as discussing what different jurisdictions are doing on housing affordability. And one of the things that we're able to highlight today was some of the work that we've been doing in partnership with Habitat for Humanity and helping people with becoming homeowners in the community. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to spend some time with Cornerstone Montgomery. They provide mental health and behavioral health services. They're a nonprofit in Montgomery County, and they just actually expanded their services to young people, 12 years old and up. We've provided this information to our school principals. As folks maybe remember that when the last time we met with the school principals last month, mental health services was one of the things that they said that they are very much in need of. And so connecting them with Cornerstone and continuing those conversations on that. And I think just in my time left, I'll speak to Mr. Wagner. I think one of the things regarding tutoring scholarships, we have talked about that under the nonprofits that we may work with. So that topic has come up in terms of ARPA spending. And I think we'll talk about redistricting when we get to that and answer those comments. And I have 45 seconds left. So I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Nothing further this evening. Turn it back over to you, Madam Mayor.
All right. So let's get into our voting items then. Our first vote, our only voting item tonight is the second reading ordinance approving FY22 budget amendment 3. There are no changes from the first reading. May I ask someone to move the ordinance? Anyone? All right, Councilmember Siemens moves, Councilwoman Searcy second. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the vote?
Yes, Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Great. And now we're going to get into, we have 2 work sessions. The first is on redistricting. I'm going to turn it over to the city clerk to continue our conversation on this and bring up our consultant, Kate. And Kate, I just want to say thank you so much for being here this week, and our apologies that our conversation went so long last week, but wanted to make sure you were first up on the agenda for the work
Thank you.
session
It was very
tonight.
interesting to listen into last week.
Right, so I have nothing to add to that. Welcome, Kate. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. And you know, it wasn't bad that we had another week to kind of look at the comments that were coming in and, suggestions from counselors and things like that. So that council members. And so we have a little bit more to add to this presentation than we would have last week as well. So let me get this started. So I'm not going to go too much into the redistricting process because I've talked about it at several meetings at this point, but folks can always go back and watch old, earlier meetings about the redistricting process to get more information, in particular the September hearing. So overview, we've got criteria, outreach and engagement, and then the map options. So this is kind of what we've been working on this whole time. The criteria, I'm not going to read them all out, but these are the criteria that were adopted in September and that we have been using to create the map options so far and keeping them in mind as we keep working through them. The redistricting engagement website has the most up-to-date, maps or presentations or things like that. So that's always a good place to go. The redistricting portal you can link over to from the website. And that's how you would get to the map tool. And there's some more information and data tables there as well. So those are still available. Just a reminder, we had 2 community sessions in the fall. So that's where a lot of our comments came from to develop and refine the first set of options. There were 5 options that we started with. And then we kind of got that, feedback from everyone and created option A1 and option B that we are looking at again tonight. So I've updated the online surveys and map tool stats slide. So since we had our hearing on January 19th, there's been 5 more maps submitted, by folks kind of moving those blocks around and trying to get the deviation under 10%. And so we've had those come in, really good ideas there. And then the number of comments that have been submitted since the January 19th hearing, we've gotten 32 more comments since then. And this is all, on the options A1 and B. And then the number of comments for the entire process so far, I was very impressed when I pulled it all together. I was like, well, let's just find out, how this is going so far. So this is comments that were submitted to surveys. It includes the maps that were submitted. It includes, comments that we've gotten through email. It includes comments from the community sessions, and I'm sure that there's more, that are being distilled by council members to us, but there's probably more than 189 comments that have been kind of sent to counselors and then have been passed along to us as well. So it's very impressive for any process, never mind a city. So it's very exciting. And just a note about the comments that have come in so far. So this is not since the 19th, it's been since we released the new options, which was before the 19th. So 20 out of 22 of the map specific comments that were submitted where people are saying, I like this map or I like this map, are in favor of option B over option A. And then there are lots of comments about specific neighborhoods where they're not favoring one or the other map. They're just saying, I want my neighborhood to stay together. So we've got those comments as well, those communities of interest. So just wanted to do an update on the outreach and engagement portion of this. And then we can get into the map options. I'm not going to go through all the slides that we had from last time, but just a reminder, we've got the revised option A1, which tries to balance population while keeping residents within their current wards. And then revised option B balances population while taking many of those submitted communities of interest into account. So that was how we came up with those 2 options. And then based on we moved 1 block in the last meeting. And so ward 1, 4, and 6 are the same in both of the maps. And so we're really looking at 2, 3, and 5, differences between A1 and B. But there's still, some moves that were requested. So I'm not going to go into the statistics for these because we looked at these last time, but this is what A1 looks like. And they were both 6.2% deviation between A1 and B. So you've just got those kind of changes here along between 2 and 3, kind of swapping this area for this area, and then swapping these 2 blocks for this block here along Lincoln Ave. So that was the difference between these two maps. And we put those up on the site and got all of that feedback from folks. So then we got a lot of response or requests for, can we move this block? What if we move this block? Can we move this neighborhood back into here? What if we, can we include this piece of this neighborhood, because it doesn't make sense for it to be with this giant block that they are not a part of. So we compiled all of those requests. And for split blocks, what I wanted to do, and the numbers might look high, and that's kind of the point. And so we didn't want to just give a mid-range for the number of people we think live in that neighborhood. The mid-range is the most likely number of people who are living in a particular neighborhood that you might want to split and move into a different ward. But we did kind of a low end and a high end, and then the middle end based on, how many people live per single family home in Tacoma Park according to the census. So you'll see a low end, a medium range, a middle, and then kind of a high end. And the idea with the high end was just, if by any chance there are this many people living in this neighborhood, is it still below 10%? So then that you're safe. So we're not just picking this middle and crossing our fingers and hoping that's the number of people. We're trying to look at, if you look at both ranges here, how does that kind of play out? So for the split blocks, that's what you'll be seeing, and we'll kind of walk through that more. And then otherwise, we're just looking at whole blocks that were also requested. And at the end, this was something that we pulled together yesterday. Not all of these requests work in tandem with each other. It would be great if we could just, say, let's do all of them, and it's definitely going to work. So I wanted to pull together some combinations that do work so that there's a starting point for a further conversation. All right, and this has been posted on the website. I'm just gonna minimize this video here. We go. Okay. So Darwin Avenue was one that was talked about, I think, a lot at the last meeting. And, any way that we looked at it, we would go in and do the account of the number of buildings. It's a county data set that has the buildings in the city or in the whole county, but we pulled it for the city. Does it affect the overall deviation in either option? Because this would be a move in either option. No, both of these, even at the higher end of the range, this 2.8% is still lower than one of the higher ends of the deviation. So wouldn't affect the deviation, wouldn't affect the demographic makeup, not in a way that would be meaningful for wanting something like a majority minority ward. So in any case, you can see this lower end of the range, 15 people, assuming maybe not everybody filled out the census or not every home is occupied. This 50 people is the middle, so that assumes 2.63 persons per household, according to the census. And then the higher end of the range is, about 4 to 5 people per house, which would be a lot. But we just wanted to see within that range, are we still good either way? So this scenario always looks good. So that is hopefully helpful, because this was a particular neighborhood that's inside of a census block that has 1,000 people in it, which is much, much too big for a census block typically. And so it makes sense this would likely be, an area that is, much more associated with the neighborhood across the street from them than with the rest of that block in Ward 4. The other neighborhood we were looking at was off of Conway Ave and Prince George's Ave. And this was one where we're looking at moving. This is only in option A1. So in option B, these are all inside of Ward 3. So in A1, if you went that route and you wanted to move this neighborhood, it would affect the overall deviation. So it would be slightly higher with this middle range. You're kind of gaining a couple percentage points here. And then, this 4.9 would put it up to 8.2%. And that's assuming if you have that many people there. So that's like the highest it could probably be. And then the demographic makeup would not change much between Ward 2 and Ward 3 if you move that neighborhood. out. So we have, this is kind of it's an interesting story because you want this neighborhood moved into Ward 2. And then this neighborhood moved along Woodland Ave to Ward 3. So,
Can I stop you for just one
Oh,
second?
sure. Yep.
And say to everybody that a literal count of the residents in the Conway Circle, Prince George's neighborhood is 64 people. So if every household had answered the survey and the census, it would have been 64 people for those blocks. So that's below the average.
Yes.
So the higher end, I think we can knock out. Just wanted to share that with everybody.
And thank you for noting that. I did have a note about that, but I wasn't able to redo the numbers in the presentation by the time I had that note. But
yeah, thank you for doing all this.
Yeah. So that's, but that does land us around where the average is, which is that's a better place to be anyway in any of these situations. So, and then the next piece is this one, and you can likely assume that it's close to that average number, that it's not at the higher end, but the higher end was even if you went this high, would it still be under 10%? And then you could really have a buffer there. So Woodland Ave, if you had Ward 2 houses moving into Ward 3, you're kind of swapping these two neighborhoods. And I think if you went with option A1, you would want both of these to happen. So I'm going to kind of move along from here and show you what happens when we combine them. So this was something that I added, I think yesterday. So, if this one moves to Ward 2 and this one moves to Ward 3, you've got, people kind of switching places, and it brings you back down to a more normal range of percentages, right? So you're not affecting the overall deviation at that point if you're swapping them. And that's even assuming that's a higher end of the range, right? So even if you're in the middle, even if you're at this lower end of the range for Ward 3, it's still 2.8%, which is below, I believe, what Ward 6 is at the time, or in that option. So doing both of these at the same, if you're going to do one, you should do the other one as well, I think is what I'm saying. So it looks, you'll see here, it's over 10% if you're at the highest end, but this is really the slide to look at for, if you combine those two, then you're in a better place for having population balance between those two wards. This is for option A1 only. Hillwood Manor is a census block, a whole census block that could move from Ward 2 to Ward 6 in both options. If you just do that, it would affect the overall deviation. There's no reason to do it on its own. But typically, in most of the combinations that I'll set up, that I'll show later, we have, this block moving, it's currently in Ward 6. And so it's moving back, to Ward 6 in a lot of these situations. So you're kind of seeing this one, in the current options, it's in Ward 2, but when we move some more people into Ward 2, this kind of gets moved back into Ward 6. So this is just a block that ends up kind of moving. It's moved a lot in various options, but it is currently in Ward 6. So some of these, these are kind of like neighborhood options. We were looking at some split blocks. Now we're kind of looking into blocks again. One of the suggestions for option A1 is to move the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood back into Ward 2. So that's where this arrow is here, which is fine, as long as we move this Hillwood Manor block back into Ward 6. Then this gives you a 9.1% overall deviation. And I'll kind of keep trying to highlight this, but the reason for that high number is because of Ward 5. Anytime we keep this shape of Ward 5, anytime you see that shape, it's currently at -6.2. And we'll talk in a little bit about the blocks that appear to be undercounted. I do have a slide for that as well. So anytime you see this shape of Ward 5, it's going to be -6.2. So that brings up that overall deviation every time. Lincoln Ave is another one. So this is option B, and in option B, we're trying to get a lower deviation, but in option D, you could move this back into Ward 2. I should have added a little arrow here. You've got this going into Ward 6 as well in this one. It works. You're at 9.1% again because of Ward 5, but you could put that back into Ward 2 and then you'd have a higher deviation because of Ward 5. Another block that we've gotten comments from folks and from council members in map option B is this one right here in the middle. We're calling kind of Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll Avenue block. So if that one was moved into Ward 2 from Ward 5, then and if you moved Hillwood Manor over here, you would have to move some more people into Ward 5. So if you move this block out, it's too low. 8.4, I think. 8.4. So you would have to move other people into Ward 5 if you keep the current population of Ward 5. There's always this asterisk that says, if you keep the current population of Ward 5, then you would have to do that. So we would have to balance it out with other blocks if we wanted to move this one into Ward 2. We tried moving this one into Ward 4, and it results in a 10 point, even in this configuration here. If you move it to Ward 4, it's over 10% because Ward 4 is too high. And then in option A1, you could move this into Ward 4, but you couldn't also move Sherman Ave into Ward 4. So you've kind of got a, one or the other. So if this block could move into Ward 2 instead of Ward 4, because it's kind of full, and Sherman Ave is another block that's kind of on the table, that could be an option as well.
Can I just ask a quick question about
Yes.
that?
Yep.
Is the deviation, if that moves into Ward 4, is deviation still too great if that section of Hodges Lane is cut out of Ward 4 and put into Ward 1? Does that make any difference, or is it still too great?
It's still too much. Yep.
Okay.
I think there's too many people inside of this block. And that's if you also wanted to do the Sherman Ave block as well. So it's, if you moved, excuse me, this one into 4, and I think we do this in one of the combinations that I'll talk about later. Moving this one into 4 is an option that we look at, but I'm not sure we were able to do that and Sherman Ave, even if we moved this neighborhood out. It was too many people being moved in.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I do believe that we have a combination of things that tries to move that into Ward 4 at the end. So related to this Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll block, we have these houses here along Jefferson Ave, and we actually have there's another slide, but we have these houses here along Lincoln Ave. And just a consideration to keep these houses and these houses with that neighborhood, with that block. There's not even enough houses there to really matter with the deviation unless you were at 9.95% or something. So, but it would, minimal effects to deviation to keep these houses and these houses with this, wherever that block goes, just keep them with that block was a consideration. And then this is the other group of houses that would be kept with that block as a request. This Sherman Ave block was another request, keeping both sides of Sherman Ave in Ward 4, because only this block was currently in Ward 1. And that was really to keep the overall deviation lower. It's 61 people that are in this block, so it can be moved to Ward 4, on its own, and have higher overall deviations for both of the options. It would be 7.9% instead. And that's without the Darwin Ave area moving out, so we'll get into the balance of those. But it is potentially likely around the same number of people. And so those end up being a good balance, and I'll kind of show that in a minute. This move, we couldn't move this one into Ward 4 and kind of shrink Ward 5, then the deviation would be too high. So that's, when I started looking at these, I was like, there's a lot of, you can do this, but not this, and you can do this, but not this. So I tried to come up with these combinations that we'll talk about at the end. And then one other consideration is the Ward 5 blocks with students that were not there in 2020 because of the pandemic. So you've got these two blocks here. And in 2020, this block 1015, it had 40 people, and 1016 had 0. And in 2010, you've got 130 and 113, right? So you're seeing a very obvious result of the pandemic. And I believe the students are already back, so it's that kind of just the timing of it. But that is a lot of people. And I believe Jesse is trying to track down the exact number of people. But it's not nothing. It would totally affect the deviation of Ward 5. If more people were in Ward 5, we wouldn't have those problems with it being so low at that shape that everybody likes, keeping it north of Carroll Ave. So this is a consideration as well. So in this, example, if there are currently 130 students in both blocks, I'm not splitting them out, but we're accounting for 40. So I'm, just in this example, this is 90 residents. So each ward, the ideal population would increase by 15 people for all of them. And then you would be adding 90 people to Ward 5. So it would affect the overall deviations just, because they're going to be slightly higher. So if you have more people in a ward, the percentage is going to be a little lower. But then this, option 5 is really Ward 5 is really the place where now it's not negative at all if you add 90 people to it. And I think Ward 5 keeps being a kind of a sticking point to balance it best with the current census data. You have to reach across Carroll Ave and bring blocks from somewhere and put them into Ward 5 to get close to 5% deviation, if that's what you want to do. But if you were able to add more people into Ward 5 reasonably, and the city attorney gives you the thumbs up, then you're not having to move those blocks anymore in those areas. All right. So that was kind of,
quick
go
question.
ahead. I can't see hands. I'm sorry.
Have other jurisdictions pursued something similar? And if we did that, what do we need to do? Put a footnote in a resolution, or how do we say that we're accounting for the pandemic?
I think that is a Jesse question and a city attorney question.
I could answer Mr. Smith, I can answer the question about the ordinance, and that is that we would explain in the ordinance, in the whereas clauses, what was done. And we did there was something similar in 2013, because they were accounting for vacancies in buildings that were under construction.
That's right. That's right. Very good. Thank you.
It's definitely, it's not something that you are trying to pursue across the whole city and trying to analyze every single block and see, because there was a lot of undercounting in the census across the board. But in this particular place, it's very clear that the students were not there that are typically there because no one was allowed on campus. So I think that makes sense, so as long as not me is signing off on it, then it would make your kind of planning for the final boundaries easier, because Ward 5 looks how everybody has wanted it to look the whole time, basically, in that case. So, okay, any other questions before I jump into these combinations?
One more question about the Ward 5 slide.
Yep.
What is your thinking about not including the 113 in block 1016?
So the number that I got from Jesse last week was 130 total, but I think they're working on for current students. So I think they're working on trying to find like the best number to use there, you know, and having the university, you know, attest to that's how many students are there. So that it's just a coincidence that this is 130 and so is this. This is just how many students were there before. And then last week, I was told 130 students in that, you know, in those blocks currently. But I think we might still refine this number based on if the university has more information.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, it was just by chance they happen to be the same number. All right, so I think the council members have this in an Excel file, which makes it a little easier to look at because you're looking across, and we're going to be looking at 2 separate slides and we can kind of go back and forth. But what we have here is all of the requested census block moves, potential census block moves. And we have the starting map option, either A1 or B. Sometimes it's not applicable. So in B, this block is already in Ward 2, so it's not applicable. And then I've numbered them so that it's easier for us to discuss them. They're just these combinations of requests. So if you start with combination 1 and you look at the green cells, those are the things that I am considering in that row. So if we move those Long Branch Sligo blocks to Ward 2 and we move Hillwood Manor to Ward 6, which is a map we were just looking at, we've got 9.1% deviation. If you then add in that Sherman Ave to Ward 4, that block moving to Ward 4, then you're at 10.8. And that wasn't a stopping point because we know this Darwin Ave neighborhood is going to play into this number. So we don't have to stop here, you know, with just the blocks. But I did want to show, here's the deviation. If we just move these blocks and nothing else here, you know, here's where we're at. And then this one is moving Sherman Ave and moving this Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll to Ward 4, but you can't then move the Long Branch Sligo blocks to Ward 2 because then Ward 5 is too low. So I'm trying to show combinations that work, you know, that don't put the deviation up to 15% or something that we can't come back from. And then for option B, we have number 4 is the one of any of these combinations that does the most. And I'm kind of flagging this. So in this row, we do have to move Long Branch Sligo blocks to Ward 5, which is not currently in the option. But if you added people to Ward 5, you wouldn't have to do that. So, you know, I kind of put a caveat there, like if you do add population kind of at the end of this, you don't have to do this one. So Ward 4 really does the most of the requests and has a pretty low deviation. So in the interest of we don't have the number for Ward 5 or the, you know, that we are definitely doing this, I kind of left this here just to show what the balance looks like, but this could come back out. And then combination 5, you're moving this Lincoln Jackson area also down into Ward 2 and Hillwood Manor to Ward 6, and then trying out moving Sherman Ave as well. So it's kind of like various combinations, but combination 4 does the most. So these are some block moves that don't put us at, you know, 14, 15, 16%, gets us close. And then we're going to continue. So if you were imagining a spreadsheet, you would just be looking to the right, but we're going to go to the next slide. So I carried the combination number over for us. So now we have these neighborhood splits. So you've got Darwin Ave moving to Ward 1. I moved it every time. It works every time. So moving it every time, I feel like this is a good one. The Woodland and Conway, I always did in tandem. Like I said, they play well together. The percentages are better if you do them at the same time. For option B, it's not applicable because they're all within Ward 3. And then these are kind of, you know, depending on if you are moving the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll Ave block to Ward 2 or Ward 4, you know, you have some homes that are moving to either one. But these are the 5 homes that are on, or the 10 or so homes that are on either side of that block. So wherever that block goes, these homes are just going to go with it. And then we have combination 4 is moving those ones as well. So in this case, and so these are all calculations using that mid-range deviation. So it's not using the high range. It was a lot of calculating just to get it to the mid-range. So if we did get to 1 or 2 of these that we are interested in, I can do more, kind of looking into what the low, medium, and high range is. But it gives you an idea that we are, doing well here. And then this last column is, would adding population to Ward 5 blocks, those university blocks, lower the overall deviation? So there's one case where it wouldn't, because the deviation is not dependent on Ward 5 in that case. But for the rest of them, Ward 5 is either in that shape where it's at minus 6.2%, or in this case, those 2 blocks could go back into Ward 2 and it would probably still be close. I think all of these would be close to, I'm going to estimate 6 to 7% for that mid-range if you added population to Ward 5. So it depends on how many people, because it affects the ideal population as well, that each ward is, where all the percentages are being calculated from. So I didn't do a calculation because we need the number of people, but that it would help in all of these cases to add people to Ward 5 would bring that deviation much lower in almost all of these cases. So that's kind of what this, and the council members have this in an Excel file, so you can read left to right and kind of see across, but these are the combinations that work with the various requests. And then I wanted to pull together just a map of what combination number 4 looks like, because it does the most things. It does like 8 different things. So it uses MAP-B as a starting point, which is what a lot of the community members have, either they like MAP-B how it is, or they would like to start with it as, a starting point. So we have Hillwood Manor moving to Ward 6. Sherman Ave is in Ward 4. This Lincoln Jackson block and the Lincoln Jefferson Carroll block and the houses along the edges would all be in Ward 2. So they kind of all stay together. Keeps associated homes on those roads would pull them into Ward 2. The Darwin Ave area is going into Ward 1, which is currently where it is. Woodland Ave and Prince George's Conway areas wouldn't, you wouldn't have to split them out because they're all contained in Ward 3. And we've got our little plus people up here. If residents can be added into these blocks, then these 2 blocks can stay in Ward 2 with the rest of the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood. And just kind of the last point here is kind of reasoning, the areas that you're splitting, if you're doing this, are small. So it's about 10 houses here and about 19 houses here. So you will be more confident of the demographics, statistics and the overall population statistics, the fewer splits you do. So you'll be able to, report demographics for all of Ward 3 in this case. Where if you start splitting, these other neighborhoods, then you don't know the demographics. You might have a good idea of how many people are there, but you might not know, other things about those populations. So just kind of my flow analytics plug for keeping blocks together for the, demographic purposes. So the overall, ward demographic, the overall percentages wouldn't change very much with those splits, but you wouldn't be able to know the specifics of them. So this is what combination 4 looks like because it takes the most things into account. So I wanted to leave it there. And then just note that the next steps, there is a public hearing next week on the 16th. And then I will go, that's the last slide that I have. So I will go back and then we can go to any slide you like and ask me any questions you like.
Thanks, Kate, very much for this. starting with this map, Councilman Costick, not to put you on the spot, but I think the comments regarding some of the places that residents wanted to stay together came out of the meetings you had. And if I'm looking at my notes correctly, I do think this addresses most of what has been raised over the last couple of weeks, but wanted to double check with you to make sure we're not missing anything.
Yeah, thank you. This, I really appreciate all the details, Kate. This is all fantastic. And thank you for creating this map because my head was about to explode looking at the spreadsheet, trying to imagine it. So the questions that I have, and I guess just to answer your question, Mayor, about the neighborhoods, I think this does address a lot of the questions that had been raised to me by different neighborhoods. This and as well as I think to a lesser extent option 1 that you have here, if I'm looking at it correctly. The question I had with this map was the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll block and the Sherman Ave block. So I know you answered that you can't do both, but could you do the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll block into Ward 4 instead of the Sherman block, or is that not possible?
I think that would be possible.
That might be possible.
And I think a lot of this also kind of revolves around, like Ward 5 keeps playing into these total deviations because it's often at -6 or at -4, so if you moved this block and these houses here into Ward 4, it might put Ward 4 up to 4.5%, which might be fine if Ward 5 was at -2. You know what I mean? So it's like, if we know the numbers for Ward 5, we might be able to move it into Ward 4. I think Ward 4 I'm pretty sure that Ward 4 can take that number of people. It just puts the Ward 4 deviation up higher. It puts it at 4.5% or something like that. And so that's where you start getting into now it's not playing nicely with Ward 5, who's like so far, under. But I think if we got the Ward 5 piece figured out, that could be a consideration of, if we know how many people this is, redo the calculations and then see if that balance could work with moving this block into Ward 4 instead.
Yeah, and I think we want to be careful about increasing the population in Ward 4 too much because I think there were some questions kind of looking at some of the census blocks there about whether they were undercounted as well. So I don't necessarily want to advocate for that if it's going to create a big difference. I was just a little surprised to see it because when I was talking with the neighborhood, I actually hadn't really talked with them about the idea of moving that block into Ward 2 because it just didn't seem like that was possible. So I'd like to kind of loop back with them and just get some feedback from that block if they have thoughts. Their kind of initial thought was that they associated a little more with Ward 4. And just looking at the map, Carroll Avenue is kind of this nice little boundary there. So it's a little odd having that chunk cut out.
Give you, I know it's a concern of mine and I don't even live there. If you're walking down Carroll Ave, you've got 1 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 5 within like a mile or something, the more you can have, if most of this side of Carroll Ave is 4, then it doesn't feel maybe so chopped up, but that's, that's like a geographic, look for natural boundaries kind of a thing. So, but it could be possible. I think the only reason it isn't is because of Ward 5. So, and in this one, even like the deviation here is over 10% as it is, but we need the people in Ward 5 to keep this area together down here. So, or to keep this, otherwise we'd have to move this one back into 5 and potentially also these ones. So
yeah. Okay. All right. That's helpful. I guess the other thing I'll just say is, for Ward 3, as it currently is, all of the maps and anything that we do, it creates a lot of chaos for Ward 3. And I do just want to recognize that, because it is a big change for residents in Ward 3, no matter what. And you've got people from the current Ward 3 going into potentially, let's see, 4 different new wards. And it is breaking up the SS Carroll neighborhood, and in some of the cases is breaking up some smaller neighborhood affiliations, really, no matter what we do. So I appreciate that there's been some attention to kind of look at whether we can shift things around to try, to the extent possible, to keep immediate neighborhoods together where they can. And this is helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So just for ease of thinking about our conversation next week, what I think I'm hearing from folks is that in terms of a new option B, is it amenable that we say that this is moving in a better direction and replace what we currently have as option B with this option? So that next week, when we have the public hearing and we're looking at which map we want to go with, we would now be looking at this one for option B. And I'm specifically looking at Councilman Costa, because I think this does the most to your for your current constituents. Yes.
Yeah, I think this is an improved map B from my perspective. Yeah.
Okay.
I think in that case, I think we would just call it option C, because
Okay.
we've made enough changes to this one. And then anytime you're going back through materials, you'd be like, which option B, which date was it? So I think we can call it option C, and it would be option C on the website as well.
Okay, that's great. So we would no longer consider option B, but now option C will be on the table.
Yep. And I can make this map, as it looks, not with my drawings on top of it.
Mhm.
The deviation is going to be something like 11 or 12%, because, we're taking into account this neighborhood moving out of Ward 4, being able to help with the Sherman Ave block, and this potential adding people to Ward 5. So in the map tool itself, the deviation is going to look high, but it would give people something to work with. And then in the PDF map itself, I can indicate these things. I can draw on the map, on the PDF, and show it's intending to move these folks as well. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So seeing no objections then.
Clarifying question
Yeah.
on map, but
You just muted yourself, Councilman Raleigh.
thank you. When you post it, could you clarify whether or not there's an assumption of adding folks into Ward 5 in order, and then whether the Long Branch Sligo blocks are being moved or not? Because I heard two different versions of that just now, and one is much more. One runs counter to a huge amount of public opinion that we got early on about Long Branch wanting to stay together. So the clarifying question is could you do that when you post the map C?
yeah, I think we would have to do that. So either we would have to, I think the best thing would be to post this map that looks like this without including the Long Branch Sligo blocks in Ward 5, because then we're going to get back into it, and we know.
That was what I meant. And could you
could
do me a favor? I don't seem to. Yeah, there it is. Never mind. I do have it still up. Yeah, that would be good if you could clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's just me and Jesse and whoever else getting together after this to see how many people can we put in Ward 5 for those blocks? Like if we have that number, I don't know, Jesse, if we have that number yet, and then recalculating because it would change the ideal population. So every ward is going to get bigger by 15 or 20 people, however many people. But then I would redo the calculations for this one, but.
Okay. Councilmember Kovar, can you hold on 1 second? I just want to go back to Councilman Costick and close out. Yeah.
I just have one very quick request, which is, could we have this map as an option in the scenario builder so that we could play with some of the deviations?
Yep. So that's where, yeah, that's where you'll see if I make this exact map, it's going to be at like 12% or something like that, because Ward 5, you can tell it's going to be too low. I think it'll be at 8.4% under, in this situation. But we are assuming that we can move people into that ward. And so it wouldn't be at 8.4%, but in the tool for now, it's going to be 8.4%. So if we do get that number, I might be able to update the block totals for those 2 blocks and have it actually be in the DSM, which would be helpful. I'd have to see how I can do that, but I'm pretty sure I'd be able to do that.
Councilmember Kovar. Oh, yes, the city clerk wants to jump in. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention the concerns about the students at Washington Adventist University. So as Kate mentioned, the difficulty we've been having in terms of getting numbers. So what we've learned is that what I've heard from them is that they have about 130 students on campus now. So we were hoping to drill down a bit more into that in terms of, do they expect that to be the number in future years? Is that, what were the numbers before pre-pandemic? And there are just a lot of questions we don't know answers to. So the council will need to make some decision on what a logical number is. And we have not been able to get as much information as I would like to from the university. So I'll just share that.
Yeah, and if we don't get that information for next week, or in time, I can use 130. It will help. I think it'll give us all a better picture of where we are at. And then you can assume if it ends up being more people, the deviation would probably be lower. So, but at least we'd have something to work with temporarily anyway.
Councilmember Kovar.
All right, I hate to jump the line. Is it possible for me to just ask a quick question to follow up on that?
Yeah.
So it looked like, based on the 2010 census numbers for both of those census blocks, that we're really looking at, I guess, the max in would be, in fact, 243 students.
Yep.
And so what we're being told right now, I mean, the men is what was actually reported in the census of 40, and what we're being told is on site is 130. So if we wanted to kind of play around, it would be either going with the number of students that are on site today at the 130, or potentially, worst case scenario, guesstimating that we would be at the 2010 numbers of 243. So because that range is huge. So I just want to make sure that I'm thinking about this right in terms of like the actual number that could potentially be on campus, where we're trying to figure out what to guesstimate in terms of campus housing. Okay.
Yeah, and in this case, with this option C that we're calling it, we're moving, with this block included, it's at minus 6.2. And if you remove this, I think it's at minus 8.4, just for Ward 5.
Right.
And so I think, if it's 130 people, if we add in another 90 people, it's going to be good. But if we added in 150 people, it would be even closer to 0. So it gets even better the more people we add in. So I think it's not a matter of, if it was 240, it's not going to throw the deviation off in the other direction, I guess is what I'm saying. It would just I think it would just bring it closer to 0. So
it would just make it easier for us to be able to make the adjustments that folks might want without throwing the deviation completely out of whack in some cases.
Yeah. And I could do the range between 130 and 240, something I could do. Here's your low end range and here's your high end range for a Ward 5, adding these 2 amounts of people.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I don't know about my colleagues, but I think we'll have to probably land somewhere in between there, depending on what we hear back from the university. So, and thank you, Mayor, for letting me jump in. I appreciate it.
Well, Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, and thanks for all the information. I had two questions and I think two comments. So the first question isn't really for right now, but just something I've been curious about. Once we complete this process, is there an ability or a mechanism by which we could ask the Census Bureau for the future to make a few changes to some census blocks that we think are particularly problematic, or is that something that they just have their own mysterious way of coming up with them and that's the way it is?
I'm 99% sure you can ask the census to change the census blocks, which I think that you should do. Otherwise, you're going to kind of end up in the same spot again. And there's definitely a few blocks like that, the big one in Ward 4 that has 1,000 people in it. It's like, that should be 4 different blocks. And then you could really, like you'll be able to, it'll be much easier to keep neighborhoods together if the blocks aren't so,
And okay, and so for next week, there's going to be this public hearing, and I apologize, Mayor Stewart, if I didn't fully understand, but are there going to be multiple possible options, but people can obviously suggest changes to them, or do we know how many different options would potentially be?
My hope is that we have two. And we entered into we've been talking about this sort of option 1B and option B. And what I'm hoping to get out of this conversation is kind of updates to both of those that respond to the public input we have received to date. And then next week, hear from the public in the public hearing. And at our work session next week, have council do a hand vote if we're ready on which one we want to go with. So I'm hoping we can get as far as possible tonight with reflecting the comments we've received. And that's why I keep calling on Councilman Gostick for this one. And it sounds like what we're calling option C now is going to be one of the maps that we will put up on the city website and be considering next week.
Okay, well, so I appreciate that and I understand that. So two comments then. One is, and Mr. Gagliardo asked about this and others commented on wanting certain criteria or all the criteria to be met and understandably looking at which map they thought better met the criteria. So, and just very quickly, the 6 criteria that are cited in our resolution are equal population to the extent we can get there, or at least within that 5 to 10% deviation, having the wards be compact, having them be composed of adjacent territories and contiguous territories, having them follow natural boundaries, not being gerrymandered or set up to defeat or elect any particular person, and trying to keep neighborhoods together. And so what's interesting about it is when you think about all of those things, and particularly if we're using census blocks overall, with some changes now, it looks like, I think using census blocks helps ensure that we know the population so that we can get closer to that equal population. But some of those criteria work against each other. And I just think it's important for people to understand. You can't literally score 100% on all 6 criteria, because in some cases, by going with natural boundaries, there might be a deviation away from a neighborhood, or by keeping the neighborhood together, then the numbers might be off, or by making it compact, and that might have an impact on someone's election. So I just want to point out that they can have kind of countervailing impacts. As for the specific ones that we've talked about tonight, and I understand there's a lot of different ways that the pieces can be combined, and I thought the spreadsheet that showed all the different combinations was very helpful. So Kate, thank you for that. Kate Durham, thank you for that. I would like to see a map that responds to some of those other points that were mentioned in there, so that where the Conway and Prince George's piece and the Woodland piece.
That's map option 1, Councilmember Kovar,
Right.
not to cut you off, but we're not there yet. So can you-
Okay, but I'm just
so
giving.
we're going to go back to then the other option, but since Kate did such a great job on this one because it was so confusing, so that's the next step. So I just wanted to ask council members if there are any objections or any additions to moving forward with this map as one of our new options, which would be now option C. So we're good. Okay. So this is now option C is one of the finalists, I guess we can say, moving forward for public comment and discussion next week. So we have option C. All right, now let's, if we can, Kate, go back to option, what we are calling, what had been up on the website, option 1B. And you looked at a couple of things. I had a question for you though, in this spreadsheet. Is there one of the combinations? I was trying to figure out. I think there's a combination that you missed. No, okay. Yeah,
there definitely can be.
Because I was trying to feel like, so if we add numbers, well, forget about Ward 5. So if we do the Long Branch, Sligo, and the Hillwood Manor, right? Like we do those together.
Yeah, and I think just to pause for a moment. So combination 1 has kind of a better deviation. Combination 2 is combination 1 plus Sherman Ave. And so I put combination 1 in there because it is like, it's a good option for some moves, but I would almost not look at 1 because 2 and 3 have more stuff going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it looked like option 1 addressed many of the concerns, except I'm trying to understand what we're doing with the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll area in option 1, like where they land.
Yeah, so in combination 1, we didn't try to move this, it's kind of grayed out here. We didn't try to move that one. We were trying to keep the deviation lower to show some options. So really, I think for starting map option A1, you're looking at 2 and 3. And so your things that you are trading between combinations 2 and 3 is either the Long Branch Sligo blocks go to Ward 2, or the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll area goes to Ward 4. And it's like an either or, and that's because of the population in Ward 5 again. So we might be able to, we'd have to know how many people were in Ward 5 to do these blocks moving back to Ward 2 and this moving to Ward 4 and some of the other neighborhood splits that we're talking about. It might be possible to do them depending on how many people are potentially being added into Ward 5. So,
but what if we didn't move the Sherman Avenue to Ward 4? I think, and again, and I might get a lot of emails tonight from folks on Sherman. So, but I'm just going to, think that the concerns and the folks who live on the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll are feeling more strongly about wanting to be moved into Ward 4 than the folks on Sherman. So I believe
you can have Long Branch, Sligo blocks to Ward 2, and then Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll to Ward 4 instead of Sherman after Ward 4 is another idea. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think that would be fine.
And I think,
can I ask a point of clarification?
Wait, can I just make sure?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Sure. So then I think if we did that with combination 2, let me just look at it for 1 second. Sorry, I just want to, before I lose my train of thought.
I wish I could annotate the screen, but it doesn't look like
I know. And then the Jefferson 5, as we're calling them, we could also move them into Ward 4.
Anytime you move the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll block you're
to-
also moving these guys. So
Okay.
they almost don't have to be there because they're just kind of going with it,
Right.
but I wanted to show, here's the deviation with just blocks. And then here's when we start adding in, these kind of splits. But yeah, I can definitely look at one where this is green instead of this one. So we're moving these ones. And again, a lot of this is because of Ward 5. Anytime we're moving Long Branch Sligo blocks back into Ward 2, it's affecting Ward 5, but it probably won't. It definitely won't if we add in 100 more people. So,
but I think option 2, doing that switch with the Sherman and the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll, from my notes, addresses the concerns. And Councilman Costick, would you just, sorry, and then I'll get back to you, Councilman Dabala.
Yeah, I think it would be best if we could do both. And if there is some option that allows for that based on the additional students in Ward 5, great. If not, I think the mayor is right that there were stronger feelings on Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll than Sherman. So if we had to choose one of those, I think I would probably choose that one.
Yeah, I think it was one or the other, just because, and it was the same thing with that combination 4 where we moved that neighborhood into 2, like we were saying, but we might be able to move it into 4 if 5 isn't so low. You'd still be within a good, range. So I can try for both and then see what that looks like. And especially if I have this range of, 130 to 240 people to put into Ward 5 to look at, if we looked at combination 2 with both, with people in Ward, like, could we do both in both situations? Because I believe I'm looking at it for combination 4 as well, just to see, what does Ward 4 come up to, and does it feel too high to folks? But we can look at that.
Okay. Cool. Councilman Dabala?
That was my clarifying question. If you're going to assume the adjustment to Ward 5 in the new map C, then you should assume it here. And I think a map would be helpful, actually, literally a map like we have for
it would help both. I think the question for both is, can we move both of these blocks into Ward 4 and keep, and have a reasonable deviation? And is everybody fine with Ward 4 being whatever that number is? I want to say it's like 4.5%. I'd have to look again, but is that a reasonable percentage over for Ward 4 is also another question to think about. And if it's not, in either case, you could move Sherman Ave back to Ward 1 and it would solve that. If people think it's too high, then you could just move that block back in either case. So I think exploring that for both makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And then I believe combination 2, they all include Darwin Ave. All of these ones include these splits because it made sense. And then in that case, these would all be included. Well, these ones would be included as well. So
yeah. So I think the priority is definitely Long Branch. So that knocks out option 3. And I'm trying to just get us now.
It's the same thing in 4. I was like, I'm putting it here.
Yeah. No, but this is good. Hey, this is really helpful. So I think I'm going to propose to my colleagues that our new option D that we'll consider is what is combination 2 here, but including the Jefferson, Lincoln, Carroll. And as you do that, if we need to take out Sherman, not move Sherman, but we're assuming the additional students at the WAU campus, so that we have the same assumption for option C and option D that we're looking at.
And I'll do the same range of students just to make sure, like, if it's 100 students, if it's 200 students, like, how does that affect things? Are we still in a reasonable range here? Or if you add 200 students, is that bad? Does that push us over or something? But I don't think it will.
Great. are folks good with that? We'll have a new map C and D that reflect this conversation to share with folks, and then that's what we'll discuss next week.
Can you slide to the right so we can see what else is in Ward number 2 again? Just so, yeah.
It would also include these folks going to Ward 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
They would just go with that block. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So just one thought for how my brain works for naming options C and D, just because we've got A and B.
Yeah.
I would name this combination 2C, and then I would name 4D. Like, so it
That's
goes
fine.
A, B, and then C, like C and D are in the same order as opposed to, does that make sense? I don't know if anybody else would be confused that way, but
It's probably most important that you keep them. I think we're fine.
okay.
Would I just let us know what once you look at the maps, I think it's easy to know which ones we're talking
yeah.
about. They're pretty distinct. So
Right.
I was just going to suggest, I wondered if we could just choose maybe a letter that is farther away from A and B. I don't want people to think it's like A, B, C, and D, and you're choosing among 4. Like, could we choose like Y and Z or something? I don't know.
Because we used options 1 through 5 to start with, and then we're like, let's use A and B. That's going to be clear, which it has been.
yeah.
We need more symbols. Yeah, but we could use Y and Z or something like that if you want. I mean, it's up to you guys, but
Yeah, that'd be fine with me. That's a good suggestion. Or Roman numerals. No, I'm kidding.
like an @ symbol and a $sign.
Councilwoman DeBala, did you?
Yeah, thank you for getting us through this. This was very helpful. I did want to make a couple of comments on the bigger picture. So we've worked very hard here to accommodate requests in particular neighborhoods, but I did want to point out a couple of things overall. I think we're all aware that besides the pandemic, there was also undercounting in terms of residents being unwilling to do the survey, particularly people of color, people who are in multifamily buildings, people who are immigrants. And so I am less troubled by a deviation amongst the wards, particularly Ward 5, than I might otherwise be. So I think that just needs to be said, that we all know that there's been undercounting, unfortunately, through no lack of effort from city staff to get that to happen. I also want to point out that while we've been attempting to accommodate requests of specific neighborhoods, which I think localized neighborhoods, which I think is really important, I don't want to lose sight of the notion of the idea that the old B, whatever it turns out to be, does move half of a ward into another ward. And there are folks who would wake up one morning and be a little surprised by that when they have historically been in a ward oriented towards New Hampshire Avenue for many, many years, decades, and now are suddenly in a ward oriented towards Old Town and the groups and interests there. It also just something to think about. In one of the meetings I had, a resident pointed out that what's left of Ward 2 would be guaranteed to not have an incumbent. So while we want to not bend over to gerrymander someone into a job, we also probably don't want to eliminate the option of someone being able, a large number of people being able to vote potentially for an incumbent. So I just want to point those two bigger picture issues out as we move ahead with these options. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith?
I would like to thank Councilman DeBala for her comments. I don't think that we will ever have an accurate count for Ward 5, notwithstanding the students at Washington Adventist University not being there, but also we cannot forget that we had a president that was waging war on sanctuary cities. And I think that position was drilled into many of the residents that live in Ward 5. So they were not going to fill out the census form. And I also want to say that I believe that, yes, we should not bring politics into this process, but as the deciding body, we should also try not to do any harm to those people that want to continue to serve in some capacity.
Councilman DeMala, is that an old hand? Yeah. Great. Kate, do you need any, and Ms. Carpenter, do you guys need anything else from us?
I don't think so. Yeah, I'm glad that the matrix made some sense to you.
It was, you know, I think someone, a resident asked us to earlier, Councilmember Kovar went over the whatchamacallit, the goals we had set for this, but I think part of the question that was asked earlier is, have we gotten from the consultant everything we wanted? I would say yes. Thank you very much. Your analysis. This was terrific to be able to do this. This was an iterative process. We never thought that the first maps that were going to come out were going to be perfect and the ones that we were going to go with. And you have taken the feedback from residents and from council and digested it and reflected it and given us back the information we need so that we can make an informed decision on how to proceed with this. So I say you've done an excellent job and I thank you very much for this. And with that, I'm just going to ask you one other question and you can tell me that you don't know the answer yet. But given that we have the public hearing next week, when could we expect the additional map and things so that we can post them, you think?
Is a good question. One moment. So I should be able to do it by the end of the day, Friday. So at least you would have it for the weekend, you know, and then, you know, to start the week.
No, that would be great. Ms. Carpenter, do we think if that we could?
Yeah, if you could get it to us by the end of the day, Friday, we could get it posted Friday, you know, sometime Friday.
Yes.
Right. Saturday.
Yeah, I think that you would need that much time for folks to be able to look at it as well before the meeting next week. So we'll get option C, Y and Z posted.
Y and Z. I like it.
Yeah, the same, and we'll have the district scenario modeler as well for each of those, given that there will also be neighborhood splits and stuff, but at least there's something that shows the block moves, you know, and maybe we can explain that before, you know, above the link, like this just shows the block moves and not the neighborhood splits, but if you want to, you know, use it in that capacity, you can. So
great. And hopefully the Washington Adventist University will get back to us with additional information. So thank you so much for this evening. Appreciate it.
You are welcome.
Great. Next, we'll move on to our second work session, which is coming back to our discussion of the ARPA funds. And just to remind folks that we're going to have this work session because we've gotten some late breaking new information that staff is going to present to us, and that we will have we will have the draft ordinance and another work session next week. So we're not voting next week. The first vote we have scheduled is for the 23rd. So just want to make that clear. This is a work session. Staff is going to present new information to us, and we can ask questions and clarifying things. But I think our goal for this evening is to kind of take in that information and ask questions of it and be able to come back next week and be able to make further decisions. I'll turn it over to Ms. Clark.
So I'll jump in, Mayor and members of council, for you this evening. The mayor hit it right on his head. This continuation of the reconciliation process that we did last week. Staff, tonight, this evening, we're going to share just a few slides to speak to some of the questions that we received since last week. We'll also address the latest staff recommendation proposal that we shared with council earlier today, and then answer any questions you all have. Tonight, we also ask our respective department directors to be available tonight to answer any programmatic questions that you have for each of the projects. And our goal, as always, I'll keep reiterating, is to get to a place over the next few weeks so we have the full list of projects approved by council so we can begin the staff-led design and implementation process. With that, I'll turn it over. I think Ms. Clark is going to share some specific details. And after we do that, then we'll discuss the new staff proposal.
Sure. So thank you, City Manager Fox, and good evening, council members. I think we should start just by showing council and the public the new reconciliation sheet that we're working with this evening, which reflects where council left off at the end of last week's meeting, as well as a new staff proposal that makes some adjustments based on new cost information that we received on the library project last Thursday. So the day after last week's meeting, we received new cost information. And also council had asked us for more detail in terms of the 3 million or so that's being allocated for social services partnerships and how that might break down into 3 different projects. So nonprofit grants, community connectors, as well as direct cash assistance. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Dan, are you ready to share the reconciliation sheet or do you need another minute or two?
I can bring it up.
Great. So we'll just show it quickly and then we'll talk about my slides, which speak to the staff proposal. All right, so we cleaned up the sheet a bit and made it just easier to read and clearer to show very clearly where council left off at the end of last week. So you'll see the first column there are the totals that council tentatively agreed upon at the end of the meeting last week. The next column are the new staff adjustments that are being proposed due to the library cost information. And then the final bolded column is where council will start this evening. And those, again, are the same totals as council agreed upon at the end of the last meeting. But we have the staff proposal just for reference, depending on how council chooses to act, given the new library cost information. So that's what we'll be working with this evening. All right, so if you could end that, Dan, and then I'm going to share my screen. All right. Give me 1 second. All right. So this is a continued work session. Okay, so again, the big piece of information that we received, and again, this was given to us last Thursday, we were able to meet with our architects and cost estimators yesterday just to review it. But essentially, we believe the deficit that we are working with that we would like to cover with ARPA funds for the library was around 2 million. We received an updated cost estimate of where the gap has increased to 4 million. And I have Bob Jones, who is a representative of our construction management firm, with us this evening, who can talk a little bit to what is driving that. And I included the full budget table here, and we can certainly delve into that later in the meeting if council prefers. But essentially, really the difference is made up not by scope changes, but by market changes. So the last cost estimate that we received was based on numbers from over the summer. Even at that time, we had a significant cost increase of about 1.5 million
from the last cost estimate that we got back in December 2020. And so we were already seeing inflation in the market in terms of doubling in the unit prices of materials as well as rising labor costs. And since, over the summer to today, that has certainly continued to be the trend. Working through it with our cost estimators, they're highlighting supply chain disruptions that have led to higher unit prices across all cost categories, whether it's steel or plumbing or insulation, doors, windows, et cetera. And not only are there material shortages, but obviously there's a limited number of suppliers. And so there's backlogs as well. But I'll stop there for a minute and turn it over to Bob Jones, who's been waiting. And Bob, could you just speak a little bit to the trends that you're seeing in our cost estimate?
Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Jones with Arcadis. Glad to meet everyone. And so part of the methodology used to do the estimating is, our estimator has his own cost database that he's constantly updating with, new information as bids come in. But one of the main ways that they do the estimate is they have contacts with all the different contractors and subcontractors. So they're getting real-time, feedback on what each of the subcontractors are seeing in each of the different trades and what the cost trends are. And there's been, just for instance, the largest increases were basically roofing. Roofing was up, I think between the two estimates, 100%. And that's just, just straight material and labor costs. And then also they're seeing increases in piping, HVAC equipment. But, the analysis we did after the estimate was done is we went back to the June 2021 estimate, did a comparison. Both estimators had the same scope. We confirmed that they were both had the same, material takeoff, so that, we had the same scope. So we confirmed that it was material and labor increases that were causing the increase, and also the, the amount of work that's out there. So if all the contractors and subcontractors are so busy that they don't, need work, they're going to put in higher markups when they do bid, because they're not they're not under pressure to win that job. So that we're seeing all the subs and contractors increase their markups when they do place bids.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. We appreciate it. We appreciate you being with us this evening. So we'll talk more, but obviously, an additional $2 million gap is a lot to make up. We as staff do recommend that still come out of ARPA, and we'll show you in a minute how we've made that up. But before we go back to the reconciliation sheet, I did want to talk about the breakdowns that we're proposing for the social services project amounts. So the total that we're
Can
proposing.
I ask you to pause for just a moment? Excuse me for interrupting, but with all this, it's hard to see. Could you please back up 2 slides? I know we don't want to dwell on it, but I didn't get a chance even to read it. Okay, so this is, thank you. Continue. I appreciate that. I just didn't catch what this was.
Sure. Yeah. And we can certainly come back to it, Council Member Dabala.
I appreciate it.
And discuss it in detail. All right. So we're proposing 2.4 million, which is a slight reduction from the 3 million that Council proposed last week, again, because we're suggesting a combination of reductions to make up the new difference for the library project. We recommend splitting that up in the following way. So we're recommending 1.2 million for direct cash assistance, which assumes a one-time payout to households and also keeps a portion of that for administrative costs.
We're also recommending 600,000 for community connectors. Our original ARPA proposal was larger, but talking with other cities and really getting into the details of how their programs have worked, we believe that we can do a very robust program with 1 full-time coordinator and 4 part-time connectors. And then finally, with grants to nonprofits, we're recommending 600,000. That would be over multiple years. And we would define different service tracks within that amount, depending on what service areas that we want to focus on. And the community connectors and grants to nonprofits are both, programs we're very familiar with. I think, direct cash assistance implementation will be a little bit more new for staff. And so, our next steps for the 1.2 million that we're recommending will be to develop, what are our eligibility criteria going to be? How are we going to verify eligibility? How are we going to get the word out and engage with the community around the direct cash assistance? Whether or not we need an application process, and of course, how the cash will be dispersed. Which staff members will be leading the project, and then just making sure that it is tax exempt and that it's not impacting other benefits for residents who are going to be recipients. And just to run through a couple scenarios to give council an idea of what we could provide using that 1.2 million amount. So if we wanted to have an eligibility checklist, which is common in other cities that are doing, for example, basic income pilots, we could have a list of criteria. So for example, here we've listed households below a certain income bracket, or households where a member's unemployed, or households that are already receiving public assistance or have experienced some other kind of economic hardship. And we've estimated based on census data that would be about 2,000 households. And for 1.2 million, we could give $425 per household. If we wanted to increase the per household amount and perhaps focus on a different target group, instead of having a eligibility criteria checklist, if we wanted to do, for example, households that are below the poverty line in Tacoma Park, which we estimate to be about 642 households, we could give $1,250 per household. As another scenario, if we wanted to switch the target group and target single parent families that are making less than $50,000, we estimate, again, based on census data, that that's about 322 households, and we could provide $2,500 per household. And then as one more example, for seniors living below the poverty line, who number about 426 in the city, for 1.2 million, we could provide about 2,000 per resident. And of course, the challenge will be making sure that we reach, whichever target group we select. So we're going to have to look at kind of what administrative data we already have available in terms of where we've interacted with high need residents. And as we said, develop an outreach strategy. So I will
Excuse me,
stop
Clark,
there.
could I just interrupt? Something happened with my screen when you just showed scenario 1. Could you just really quickly go back and show what scenario 1 was? I wasn't able to see it.
Sure.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. And I know that several council members had questions on other projects that are on the reconciliation sheet, and we can get into any of the details of those as well. We have many of our department heads on this evening. But with that, we can either answer questions on the PowerPoint or bring up the reconciliation and start going through kind of the staff scenario compared to any changes council members want to make.
Will you make this available to us as soon as possible and then also post it? But because I couldn't take notes fast enough, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Ms. Clark, maybe bringing up the reconciliation list again might help in answering and having people ask questions. I don't think council is quite ready tonight to do the same kind of hand vote thing we did last week, just because it's a lot of information to process right now. Very much appreciate the update. But I think if we walk through that, it may be helpful, especially since we have our senior leadership team with us, to be able to ask questions about the staff recommendations, so that next week we can be prepared to move forward on making some decisions. So yeah, so if we want to share that again, and I'm seeing like basically the Wi-Fi hotspots, the laptops, lending program, that all stayed the same. Does anyone have any questions? I guess maybe we can go by department for Director Jones in the library regarding hotspots or laptops. And then on municipal broadband, there was a suggestion to reduce the amount allocated. And I believe that was because the first allocations was assuming 100% of participation, and Director Jones went back and was re-looking at the numbers, and this is probably more reflective of what would be who people would partake in the program. But I think those are the three that fall under Director Jones. Does anyone have any questions? Councilwoman Devala?
Yes, I would just like to ask Director Jones, because she gave such careful accounting in the first place of the $568,000 and how many households that would reach, what the impact of that reduction would be on the number of households and or the dollars per household. I guess I don't know which one, what the impact would be.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. With municipal broadband, that was a pretty exact number going off of the data that I had gotten from the Tacoma Park Data Explorer to look at the exact number of households that would qualify under a certain household income threshold. And so the number that I gave was under the assumption that every household would be participating for the entire duration of the program, which is ideally how you would want to approach a program, perhaps. But I think that realistically, it's okay to bring that number down, because it's going to be just really difficult to reach everybody, to get 100% of residents who qualify on board, and for the entire duration, they would have to all be on board like March 1st, which is probably not realistic for us. So that builds in some time for people to get on board, and just to be a little bit more flexible with those funds.
And just remind me what the income threshold, I'm sure I have it in the plan, but what the income threshold for a household is, and the duration if you started the day it started.
Yes, so the income threshold, this would cover all households making less than $35,000 a year. Once you get up to 50, the rate at which people are able to subscribe to their own broadband goes way up. So the $35,000 mark was the one that we wanted to focus on. But it would cover through the end of December 2024.
Thank you. So then some percentage of them is assumed to, as you said, not realistically be starting the moment the PART program started.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
Smith and then Siemens.
Can you tell us what is the total number in that group? How many residents are you estimating?
That is a great question, and I don't know that I have that information right in front of me, but I can get that for you this evening.
Okay, and so I understand your concern of getting people signed on, but have you developed a plan, or are you thinking about how you would proactively go to residents and make sure they know about this benefit?
Yes, and I actually discussed this in quite a bit of depth with Comcast as well, since they've got a very, very wide reach, and they have promotional materials that we're able to use. So that's not all coming from scratch on our end, as well as pre-printed things that can be handed out, since of course, if somebody doesn't have a broadband subscription already, we may not be able to reach them digitally or via social media or anything like that. So I think that we would rely fairly heavily on print notices and putting those in strategic places, as well as trying to get a word out in as many venues as we can. Hopefully find some ways to go through reaching people via their mobile phones, since more people have cell phone subscriptions than broadband subscriptions. So yeah, we have given quite a bit of thought to that.
And I would just suggest that the information flyers from broadband be part of our monthly newsletter forthcoming.
Sure.
And this should be a task given to the connectors so that they can go and knock on doors and make sure people sign up for this opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make sure I understood the reduction of 168,000. That's for people who, to account that everybody may not sign up in the beginning. And I would guess there's also some percentage that may not ever sign up for the thing. But those that don't sign up on the first month and are delayed starting will still incur probably the majority of that money for that one connection. And I just wonder, it looks like it's about a 30% reduction that you're making in your estimate here, and it seems to be awful high.
Yeah, it is a significant amount, but I also think that with a 30% reduction, that's assuming that 70% of all eligible people would be on for 100% of the time, which I think even that may be a little bit optimistic, just in terms of getting people enrolled into a brand new program that doesn't have precedent, that hopefully we will be able to bridge the digital divide to communicate the value of it as well.
I agree that 70% signing up, for 100% of the time is, or 30% not signing up for 100% of the time is reasonable. But the fact that they're not signing up for 100% doesn't mean they're not signing up for 90% or 80%. So it just, again, like I say, it just seems to be high. That's all. Thank you.
And if I just, we do have a contingency amount in here that we'll get to, but I think as with any of these programs, if we need to, and that's one of the things we can put in the ordinance when we check back in on how they're going, if Director Jones needed to come back to us with additional funds, that is something the council could consider. Is that correct, Director Jones, that it would be something we could add money to down the road?
Yes, the way that Comcast runs this program is very friendly for flexibility. We're only charged for as many people who are actually enrolled in the program. And so that can be in flux later and that can be adjusted for.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Siemens, did you have something else? Nope, you're good. All right, anything else for Director Jones? No? Great, well, thank you again for all your work on this and revisiting it. The next categories on workforce development, grants for small businesses, emergency rental assistance. I'm looking at what else falls under Director Cross. I think those community center renovation, would that fall under you, Director Cross? Yes, correct, right?
No, that would be PW.
That would be okay. That's PW. So you have workforce grants for small businesses, and emergency rental. Did I miss one?
The business incubator, the
Yes.
multifamily rehab, a hybrid for the rec center redevelopment also.
Okay. Great. So let's just start. Does anybody have any questions regarding those programs for Director Cross? See, Councilmember Kovar and then Searcy.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I had a few questions, and some of these I shared it briefly with the city manager and the deputy city manager prior to the meeting, but there wasn't a lot of time to look at it, and I apologize for that. But some of these relate to not so much the dollars or the program, but the kind of policy aspects of that. And I assume we might include language in the resolution or the ordinance that basically implements or effectuates this whole thing. But I just want to ask a couple of questions about that and get your take on it. So I mentioned this before, but with regard to the business incubator, I think that's a good program. I like the idea of it. It is contingent upon us finding partners who are able to do it with us, though. And obviously, there's only 4 years for obligating the funds. And so we've seen other kinds of projects where it's not always easy to line up and work things out with one's partners. And so reference was just made in the previous discussion to having a way to check back and see how things are going and potentially considering changing the amount of money. In this case, I think, and I would like to get your take on it, Mr. Cross, could we build into it a date by which we check back, and if we haven't been able to come up with partners that we could do the project with at some point, then we would say, okay, that doesn't look like it's going to happen, and the funds could be reprogrammed. So I wonder if you have any reaction to that.
Certainly. I think that is not something we can't accommodate. I think that, our staff will be working on this, daily, weekly. They're going to have a very good sense of the schedule and the ability for them to make a partnership work long before any date certain that we have to check back. So, we will be very aware of the 2024 deadline of the funds. And if there needs to be a time where you have check-ins, fine with that.
And I'll just note, every big project takes longer than anyone ever thinks it's going to. So
that is right. Exactly.
Yeah. On the small business grants now, I mentioned this as well, and I again would just like to get your take on it. I think we've talked about it being prioritized for those not in the other two existing business associations already, the OTBA and the CDA, and I think that makes sense. And then we've talked about it being for those and new businesses that may have been established in the pandemic. Potentially those, I suppose, could be an OTBA or CDA. But I also think the two other categories, I personally think it would be important to mention specifically, I mentioned this before, is the purple line question, and not so much those that were affected by it before, but it's ramping up again. So that will again potentially affect businesses in that area. And then secondly is that the at-home businesses. And I would just like to specifically say, in whatever we adopt, that those are expressly eligible, or those should be categories that we prioritize. Let's put it that way, not just that they're eligible, but they should be prioritized along with some of the others. And I'd love to get your take on that too.
Right. So we have thought to prioritize, and we've provided this in writing, those businesses that, as we said, opened during the pandemic, haven't received assistance, are not represented by the two business associations, minority and women-owned businesses as well. Right, the purple line is certainly going to be impacting businesses, and we will be here to support them. I don't want to prioritize everything, because then nothing will be prioritized if we prioritize every business area and every business. But certainly, the outreach that we'll do to home-based businesses, to those in the Tacoma Langley Crossroads area, I think, given our partners both at the state, the PLCC, and the Crossroads, that we'll be able to assist those businesses in the Purple Line area.
All right, I'll give more thought to that. Two other things. On the multifamily rehab, there was discussion last week about, given the complexity of it, that the regulations for that one would require a lot of work. And I think there was talk about the council having an opportunity before they're finalized to review the regulations. I suppose we always have a chance to do that, but I think it would be helpful to explicitly say that as well. So what do you think about that?
If the council wants to, if you choose to that's what you vote on, then that's fine. We'll provide the regulations for you.
Great. And then the last thing, and I appreciate my colleagues bearing with me, on the rec center. So I know some of the funds out of 350,000, I believe the number, is for some actual renovation, but a portion of it is also being called design work. And so what is that? Because we don't have a design process actively underway yet. So can you clarify what that?
Right, the rec center project, the rec center redevelopment project is in its infancy right now. We are still at the beginning, given the initial discussions around maximizing what we do at the site for the rec center redevelopment. Is that building affordable housing on top? Is that partnering with community partners? Is it providing community space? We're going to release a site and financial feasibility study, RFP, shortly, which is going to look at the site, the ability for us to maximize the site, look at zoning, look at the financial constraints, right, if we were to try to partner with the developer. In the meantime, right, as you mentioned on the other projects, these sorts of developments take time. And our rec center is in a state of disrepair. It is an old rec center. That's the reason why we're looking to repair it and to redevelop and get a new one. And we want to have these funds that be flexible, where if there is a repair need that, say, the roof, it just fails and you have a flooded gym floor, and now we don't have a rec center at all for any of our youth in the city. We need to access funds. We need to have funds that are available to us. And if we don't have those funds in another budget account, these funds would help us maintain the level of service that our residents, particularly our youth, deserve. On the other side of it, as we move forward in the design process, we will have these funds as well as state grant funds that we've received to move forward with design, move forward with any sorts of site studies that we need to be done, and to show any potential partners our commitment.
But if something major happened requiring that a larger share of the 350,000 be used for direct work on the facility, there's nothing that would prevent that. I mean, in other words, we don't have a specifically designed design process yet for it, right?
For repairs or for
for design.
Design of what?
Well, I don't know. That the 350,000 says it's for repairs and renovation and design. And since the design part seems up in the air, what I'm just asking is if more was needed for immediate repairs, or if, as you mentioned, the gym floor was damaged or whatever it was, could we use that, or is that design piece of it committed in some way to something?
No, nothing is committed right now. And I think, because the rec center, we are working right now to determine the next best steps in our rec center development. Is it going to be a rec center, a mixed use with affordable housing? These things take time. At the same time, we have a rec center and we have an obligation to make sure this rec center continues to provide services that our residents expect and deserve. So the time delay in between us determining what the next steps are in the process lead us, we can't go ahead and fix the rec center right now, even if it needs to be fixed, right? If they're in a perfect world, we would have already fixed it, but we don't want to fix it now. And then 5 years from now or 3 years from now, we're tearing the building down. So, the title I think was rec center redevelopment, right? So these funds are there to support the redevelopment. But as a part of that, we also have to have a current rec center. So there's no funds there's no fraction that is set aside for design or for repairs. There may not be any need for repairs. Hopefully there's not. And hopefully there's no big rains and the roof survives and there's no flooding. But if there is, we have that funding available to get us through.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, lots of hands. Hold on one sec. Next, I have Councilman Searcy.
All right, great. So I want to kind of pick up where Councilmember Kovar left off in terms of the rec center. And so that we're clear, because I do like to level set. We are fully aware of a number of interim upgrades that are moderate, that are needed for the rec center, and have been communicated that these issues are present now and will need to be addressed now. So it's not necessarily, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, Director Cross, that this is kind of like funds that'll be sitting in an account in case we need it. There are certain upgrades that will have to happen with these dollars to the current rec center in terms of like ADA issues. I know the roof was one. There was even questions about the gym floor, things that in other fiscal years would be part of like a CIP that are applicable for us to be able to use, where it's possible for us to use these ARP dollars to address. So I just want to make sure that point, that I'm understanding that correctly. Like this isn't a rainy day fund. These are funds that are actually going to be used to make interim, moderate upgrades, necessary upgrades to the facility that are needed until we're able to get to the point where final decisions are able to be made on the future state of the rec center.
So I would defer to Director Braithwaite and Director Clark on their planned budget for the coming years to make repairs to the rec center that have been identified. I'm not involved in the building management day to day. What I'm saying is that there is a time gap that to me, it doesn't make sense for us to do large scale capital projects at the rec center right now, knowing that our goal in the next 2 to 3 years is to be redeveloping and breaking ground. However, if there is an emergency need, that's where I see these funds playing a role. If there is, at the same time, it's almost like a first come, first serve, right? If there's no need for the funds, we'll have this money to be supporting our other studies. But if there's needs for the funds, then that's where that money will go.
Okay, so could the city manager or deputy city manager or Director Braithwaite?
I think Director Clark just popped on.
I'd be happy to jump in as well.
Thank you.
I would just say that, yes, Councilmember Searcy, you're correct. It will look to not only interim immediate needs, as well as looking at the future to what Director Cross was speaking to. So it's both and.
Correct. So keeping in mind that these funds have to be obligated in the next 2, it was always or has been my understanding that there is, in essence, a punch list that's kind of ready to go, provided that we okay the funds for some of the interim upgrades that would need to be made to the facility. Is that correct?
And speaking to the facility needs, We do have the report from Park and Planning when we took over the building. So as you mentioned, there's a list of identified needs. We're hoping to extend the life of the existing mechanical system as well as the roof system for as long as possible. Again, not wanting to spend money on a building that will be torn down. But there may come a time where we decide the roof really has to get replaced, even if it's only going to be in place for 3 years. Same with the mechanical systems. I don't anticipate doing any structural work, no ADA work, because again, there's really no need to do that when the building's going to be replaced. But what those repair costs could be used for are mechanical systems and functionality just to keep the building safe and operable. So it would be heating systems, air conditioning systems, and roof systems. I think other than that, we will try to Band-Aid and patch that building and keep it operational as long as possible until it's replaced.
Okay, so this is going to be an area because again, we only have until 2024 to obligate these dollars. So, I know that as we've heard others say, we're going to have these touch points of understanding what's going toward, what proportion of these dollars are going towards different aspects of design related to the future rec center, and what dollars are actually going towards the current rec center and certain infrastructure modifications we may need to make, just because we have to make them. Because one of the things that I'm getting more confused about now in terms of these dollars is what exactly, how much is going towards a design work and how much is actually going towards some of the building fixes, short-term building fixes that we may need to make.
I think the goal is to maximize the money that can go into the design process. We will bring to you any mechanical or systems needs that we decide need to be replaced through your budget and procurement process. So you will know when we decide, for instance, if the roof just cannot last another 6 months, we will bring that forward with the usual procurement process. So you'll know each individual item that we are using these funds for related to the building systems. But I think it's safe to assume that the goal is to put as much of that money as possible into the redevelopment and not into keeping the building functional. We will do the best we can, but when we have to make that decision, we will, and we'll bring that to council, and you'll have to authorize the expenditure.
Okay, and so Deputy Cross, will that RFP that you're talking about that will go out soon, will that include, because that scope sounds pretty substantial too, will that project include some of these dollars if approved?
We have budgeted funds to do a feasibility study. The feasibility study will be looking at, and I mean, this isn't the scope of this meeting, but just really quick, because it includes it helps inform the timeline. It'll be looking at the possibilities of what can be done at the site. And that'll really inform what then happens in terms of design. Are we looking for a development partner? Can we utilize the value of the site? And then the value of the site will then pay for our design and our construction, right? We don't know those answers yet. We're going to find out the best way forward, and that'll inform really how much of those funds are going to go towards design. And I don't think 350 will be able to pay for a design, right? A design is going to cost, $2 to $3 million for a rec center, I would assume. So that would just be part of it.
Okay, and so this RFP, we're expecting to get these results back by, is this a 1 year or?
I would think we would get it would be done sooner than that, than a year. We don't have the schedule laid out, but it would be definitely within the next few months.
Okay, so it would be helpful to know, not just when the RFP is going to go out, but when we anticipate getting the results back from that RFP. And then that helps you to understand, all right, well, then that means you're going to have a short amount of time to obligate those dollars towards any future design work that's based off of the results from that RFP.
Of course.
Yeah. And so that would be just helpful for me to kind of wrap my head around because I was thinking most of this money probably would end up going towards, interim upgrades, but it sounds like more of it is going towards the design, which caused me to question a little bit more of the timing. So if you could just break that down for me offline, that'll be great. The other question I have is about the multifamily housing rehab project and the proposal to, for the most part, kind of cut it in half. So when this was originally proposed at the 1.5, I questioned whether or not there was enough money there. So how many projects, and you all are proposing to cut it, how many projects are you all really thinking we may be able to, and the types of projects that we might be able to fund under the new proposed amount of 800K?
So that the amount of funds, we did not anticipate, even when it was at 1.5, that we would be completely funding these projects, right? We're looking for matches. We're looking for this money to incentivize multifamily building owners, condo associations who have needs, who have some sort of financing, but this is sort of, this closes the gap, right? This helps them obtain more financing at reasonable rates, or helps them be able to pay their financing back. So, we won't know what types of projects there are until we release the call for projects. Certainly we'll be able to spend the money. I think we'll be able to spend the money. It's just a matter of the scale of how much money we can devote to each project.
Right, and that's what I am nervous about, because I thought the 1.5 was a little on the lower end, depending on the scale and the types of projects and actually the cost that we know for some of these buildings to make certain upgrades, and whether or not dropping it down to 800K means that we're definitely going to be able to fund fewer projects, which means there may be unmet need. So it would be helpful. I mean, again, we're not going to be able to fund everything, but if you at least have an idea of, what a max award might look like, even if it is a match. If we're saying, we're not anticipating providing over 250K for any project, then that would at least help someone like me in the back of my mind know, okay, we're talking about maybe 3, maybe 4, or we're only doing no more than 100K per project. Okay, that means we're looking at a minimum 8, right? So that would be helpful to understand, because with the lower amount, it seems like we're really talking about smaller scale projects, probably not $10,000 projects. Bigger than that, bigger than what we normally would do, but we're not talking about, $500,000 projects.
Right. And I don't think we ever were talking about funding $500,000, even when it was at 1.5, because that would only get us 3. But I certainly hear what you're saying. And like I said, we will be able to spend the funds. We'll be able to obligate the funds in the time frame that's necessary, no matter what the total is.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have a problem with spending. I just think it's going to probably end up being some unmet need, and what that might look like. So, if we are able to at least get a better handle on, how many of these projects might be feasible for us to kind of fund through this initial pot, and if there's a lot of unmet need, then you all could come back to us and we could start having some conversations about whether or not there's, opportunities for us to kind of provide more funds towards this program, either through how things shake out with other line items, or whether or not we have to kind of talk about it as part of our budgeting decisions. But that's something I definitely think we're going to need to have a handle on, because I could see this money going really, really fast. And I'm trying to see, I felt like there was something else, and I think I've spoken long enough. But thank you. I'm just trying to triple check. Yeah, I think that's all I have for you. No, I think we increased the amount for the small businesses, and I think we'll be okay with spending that. One of the things that I think is important for us to, to Councilmember Kovar's point, I think it's important for us to prioritize, but I agree with you, I agree with you, Director Cross, that if we prioritize everything, then we're not really prioritizing anything. I definitely think that those businesses perhaps that were not covered by some of our business associations, we should definitely target with outreach. But I also think that, a business in need shouldn't be limited because they're necessarily covered by a business association. There should be ways for us to identify those that are in need. And if we have the possibility to meet that need, then we try to do that regardless of where the business is located in the city. But again, I agree that, businesses that did not receive funds before should be prioritized over those who did. And you all know how to work a criteria because it was done very well last time. But I do think that we have to kind of not necessarily prioritize everything. And I do like prioritizing minority and women-owned businesses in the city. I think that's something important for us to encourage as well. And that is all I have. I've spoken enough. Thank you all so much.
Council Member DeBala.
And for the most part, Councilmember Searcy has spoken for me, took most of my questions. So just a couple of follow-ups to that. On the rec center, the site financial feasibility RFP, is that essentially the state grant money that was received? Or is that already, has that already gone out?
No, so the state grant money, so we haven't received any grant money. We were informed that we've been awarded the grant funds, right? And then the
Okay,
next
so
step in the
that's the
process-
delay then. Okay, thank you.
Right.
With that.
Yeah, we have, we're going to start, we haven't even been engaged to start discussing the grant agreements yet. That money is going to be right in the next, 5-6 months. We'll be getting that money.
But we're going to start.
So that, yeah, and that money
Okay, good.
is for design and other
okay.
site-specific studies as well. Yeah.
All right. So Councilmember Susie asked for a number of pieces of information. I'd appreciate it if you'd share them with me. And when you get to that, you might as well just share it with everybody.
I think we've been sharing information. I've been sharing information through Deputy City Manager, and I believe she's been sharing it with all. And we'll
I'm
continue.
just adding my voice to the request. I also have the question about the multifamily housing, the same question. How many and what types of projects, and some kind of rough estimate, as Councilmember Searcy said, would be really helpful. And I don't know if I should be directing this at you, but I have the same question about the energy efficiency upgrades, because the 1 million was already a reduction from the original request. Now there's a proposal to have that. And I would have the same number and types of projects question about that. And that might be it for me on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Searcy, for covering my ground.
Great. Ms. Braithwaite, did you want to speak to
Sure.
the energy efficiency upgrades?
Yeah, I think, just a general comment. I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't be making these reductions. The original number was one that we thought was sufficient, well-balanced, and could meet the needs. However, this is being driven by the need to increase funding for other items. So, take it in that context. That said, I think what we're intending is to continue our electrification and energy efficiency upgrades that we've been doing for the past few years, and really ramp up and add energy and emphasis to them in outreach, because we'll have more dollars available. One of the things we will do is with the application process, where we'll combine the multifamily rehab with the energy efficiency work, we'll identify those buildings and which fund will work best for them. We will be developing a list of applications and eligible buildings, and we will go through as far as the funding will last. And then we'll be able to identify, what the gap is, what the buildings were that applied that we weren't able to provide the funding for based on, the funding running out, if that's indeed the case. What we've found with our prior energy efficiency grants is it does take a while for building owners to become aware of them and to get through the application process. So, we've got a good head start in that the city has been doing energy efficiency grants on a smaller scale for the past almost 3 years. But that said, it will take some time to ramp up, and we'll be needing to do outreach. But we don't have a crystal ball. We can't say, the type of the number of applicants we'll get. We will make a reasonable effort to prioritize those buildings that serve lower and moderate income and the rest of the criteria that we typically use. And we'll set out a threshold amount for the amount of the grants available. And then we'll gather information in that first year and know much more as to whether or not we think our thresholds were adequate or whether the need was greater. And then we'll be able to report back on an annual or even semi-annual basis to the council on how far we were able to get, how long a list we have of applicants that we weren't able to serve, if that's the case. And that will drive, future decisions of the council if there are funds that aren't used in other categories that can then get funneled back to this.
Great, thank you very much.
Apologies. Okay, next we have Council Member Kostick.
Thank you. Most of my questions have already been asked. My concerns were also just questions about sort of what the right numbers are and what it does if you reduce those amounts in the staff proposed expenditures on particularly the multifamily energy efficiency and rec center. The one other thing I'll toss out is, I guess for me, in terms of the rec center, I heard some talk about kind of the improvements that might need to be made in case of an emergency situation with the roof or something else. And it feels to me like if there's no anticipation of those things happening, that would typically come from a facilities maintenance reserve or sort of general fund reserve emergency pot. So I think if there's no anticipation of there being some type of need there in terms of repairs, it makes sense to me to not budget that into our ARPA funds, because we have a limited amount of time where we can spend those funds and a limited amount of those funds. So would rather see that going to other things and to the redevelopment process rather than the repairs.
Let's see. Oh, no other hands are up. So I'll just ask a follow-up question to that. And if you don't have the answer tonight, just as Director Braithwaite just says, we're trying to look at how to spend a limited pot of money, even though it's a decent sized money. I guess I'm trying to get my head around a little bit the recreation redevelopment, and I know we took a little bit out of that, but whether or not that is the amount that's needed. It doesn't seem like a lot, but given the conversation we've had about prioritizing design, but keeping a pot just in case, does it make sense to keep it here versus in the contingency? I guess I'm trying to weigh what we put here, what we allocate to something versus put in the contingency. And I don't know, you may not have an answer to that. You might just want to think about that a little bit, because and how much we really do need that we want to dedicate for the design. But I don't see any other hands. So I think we're done, Director Cross, with your programs, and that then takes us, I think, to we have actually Director Braithwaite, since you're with us on video, do you want to maybe, if we have questions on the community center renovation, I think that's the only one left that we haven't talked about that that would be under you. Does anyone have any questions about the community center renovation? Councilmember Searcy.
So, I mean, we now have updated numbers around the library, and it seems like a lot of the cost or the increase in costs relate to things like, you know, HVAC and equipment and things like that. Are we, or have we planned for a contingency if we anticipate similar inflation of construction costs around the community center renovation?
Yeah, that project, when we got bid prices back a while back, it was in the $800,000 range, which was what was reflected in the split budget, in the capital budget for that project. Seeing what has taken place with the pricing on the library, we just arbitrarily increased the funding. We won't know until we either have the same practice that Arcadis did with the library for a cost estimate, or till we go out to bid. The construction plan, we have full bid documents. We had permits available. So this is just a matter of waiting for the funding to be allocated so we can move the project forward. So this has been a case where the project has been delayed over time due to financial constraints. You know, we've queued it up and had it ready, and then the money closed down. So we've made some assumptions. Again, just best guess, seeing what the price increases have been for the library.
Hey, Director Braithwaite, you're fading in and out. Could you lean forward?
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what part of that you missed.
I know I heard that you made a rough guess based on what you heard or what's happening.
Yeah,
with
the experience with the library has definitely informed our estimate for the number that we put in this ARPA allocation. So until we go out to bid, we won't have a finite answer. Like I said, the bid documents are ready, and we did have permits that will need to be refreshed for this project. We can update council when we get those bid documents back. We will, of course, come to you for authorization for a contract with the award. It's a bit of a guessing game in terms of the impact of the pandemic on construction costs.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. It's helpful to know that there was already kind of like a little bit of a little bit added, and you try your best to account for those added costs.
Yeah, $400,000. That's a pretty big amount. Yeah.
No, that's helpful.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Yeah, this isn't so much a question about this project as much as a observation and an opinion, and it's connected to a lot of the changes that we're talking about here. So this seems like an okay time just to talk about it. I can talk about it in more detail later, but I mean, I sort of feel like we can't do all these things, and my thinking about it now and not wanting to see these other reductions, I do think, first of all, there's a number of questions about the library dollars that I want to get answered. We can talk about that later or separately. There's parts of it where the numbers don't seem to make sense to me, but I definitely lean at this point toward not doing the atrium or community center project and saving money that way, more than by cutting back on all the other projects that have been recommended to have us do that. And I would say in particular on the, and I know I'm adding to comments that aren't just exclusively about the atrium project, but on the social service block grant piece, I wouldn't cut that. I would try to get it above 2 million in direct payments, and then find a way just to cut back, stay within the 3 million for the grant, the NGO grants and the navigators. So I think this needs some more revamping here. And if we're going to talk about more general things like that at the end, that's fine. But since it connects to the community center, I just thought I would mention that now.
Councilwoman DeBala.
Well, that's hard to follow. I was going to just point out that I had submitted some questions this afternoon at the Deputy City Manager's request about the community center renovation. And I can repeat them, but I had been looking last week and again this afternoon for key drawings, budget comparisons, timetable, the things that Director Braithwaite, you say you've had for a while, and I appreciate that you've had them for a while. But I think it would be useful for council to see that. I understand the necessity of this project. I'm trying to figure out where the best possible sources are to fund it so it can go forward and not receive any more delays. And that part's not completely clear to me. And you answered the efficiency questions that I had. So I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Seaman.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to reiterate my strong support of the community center project. Again, I'm not restricting that to just being part of funded by the ARPA grant. If there's other source, but I don't want to see it delayed in any way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. All right. Next, and again, just because the hour is late at 10:30, and I keep forgetting this because our new policy, I'm going to shut us down or shut conversation at 11 or try to. And so if we could try to get through these next couple of items. There is the rec scholarships, and that was reduced. I see Director Clark is with us. Director Clark, if you just want to speak to that reduction in the rec scholarships.
Yes, one actually received a few questions about it, but the rec scholarships have been reduced to 300,000, and I wanted to give some numbers of past scholarships that we've given out and how we arrived at that number. I have to go back to fiscal year 19, which was our last complete year that we actually had with taking scholarships. And in that particular year, we gave out a total of 83 scholarships. Well, we gave scholarships to 83 families. So that's not necessarily 83 people. That's 83 families, because when we give a scholarship, we give the scholarship to the entire family so they can register for multiple programs. Those scholarships range from 20%, 50%, and 70% scholarships. In that year, the total number of scholarships dollar-wise, which is, we see it as a reduction in revenue. We don't actually have a pot of money sitting to the side, so it's actually a reduction in revenue. Those 83 families received approximately $88,000 in fee reductions to participate in recreation department programs. To date, just for during the pandemic, we of course went virtual, and we started offering 100% scholarships. So 100% scholarships were added to that pot. The majority of our scholarships for all of our programs are used in aftercare and summer camps. So mostly for kids programs, because those are the programs with our largest costs associated with them. And to date, just in aftercare, with the addition of the 100% scholarship to date, where families received up to $52,000 in scholarships in comparison to FY19, when the total was 88,000. Now that total does not include our summer camps, because our summer camp registration has not started yet. So what I did was sort of estimate and doubled the number that we actually used in FY19, and sort of estimate that we'll use around $160,000, somewhere $150,000, $160,000 in scholarships for Tacoma Park residents. The remaining funds from that will be used for tutoring. With the kids not being in school as much and doing a lot of virtual learning, we're planning to send in an RFP to get a company to come in and provide tutoring services for young people in Tacoma Park. In my preliminary research for tutoring, I know and we don't have an exact number of how many kids can get tutored with that or anything like that because the costs vary. Just for individual tutoring, we receive numbers from $62 per hour up to $200 per hour. So we have to put out an RFP so we can get the correct information on how many people that the remaining funds can service and over what subjects and things like that, because those are some of the things that dictate the cost to what subject they're teaching, how long it is, how many students are involved, things like that.
Councilmember Siemens.
Hands just up there waving around, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Councilmember Costick.
Thank you so much, Director Clark, for those details. It's really helpful to have the numbers and the sense of need there. One of the things I'm wondering about, in addition to tutoring, is the sort of social needs of many students that haven't been met over the past, COVID time, with a lot more isolation and a lot of activities canceled and not happening in the way that they were before, as well as some of the mental health challenges that we've seen and we've talked about in collaboration potentially with some of the schools. So I'm wondering, is that something that could be built in here? Could we utilize some of the additional kind of going back closer to the 500,000 to meet some of that need? Do you feel like the department could meet some need there? Because I think the academic is important, but I also think the social is almost more important.
Right. Yeah, I actually believe the social portion of it can be met just with us going back to in-person classes, which and in-person programs, which we've already started. Our basketball program has started, has over 600 kids registered. Our futsal program has started, which has I don't want to give an exact number, but it has a lot of kids involved and enrolled, which is the first time that we've gone back in person for those programs in 2 years. So I think a lot of the social aspects will begin to come back. The more programs that we offer and, and the health situation allows us to actually come in person. So our staff is very excited. We actually have the money in the budget. We're rolling out programs as quickly as we can for in person. So, we'll be doing additional marketing. Our summer camps will all be in person this year. Our summer camp guide will be coming out within the next month or so. So we're very excited, and we think that some of that social development that kids have been missing will be taken care of within our regular programming.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Director Clark. The mental health services is another one, but that budget line item stayed the same. So I'm going to assume no questions there on that one. And then just two other things that we'll spend the next little bit on is I know Deputy City Manager Jessica Clark presented some ideas on the social services partnership piece. Does anyone have any other clarifying questions on that? Councilmember Smith.
I would just like to go on the record and agree with my colleague, Councilmember Kovar, that we need to figure out a way to increase that dollar amount specifically for direct payments of residents. I mean, all these projects are nice and theoretically interesting, but these ARPA dollars are supposed to help residents, and especially those in need. And we have a whole bunch of residents that live in this city, according to the census data, that are in need. And it just seems like we keep having these meetings to talk about other things, and people are going hungry, who can't pay their rent, or can't pay their utilities, and other issues that people are suffering. We just need to focus, get this money out as soon as possible.
Okay. Any other? All right. And then the last item was on any other additional questions people have on what was presented regarding the library. Councilmember Kovar, and then Costick, or sorry, Councilmember Costick, and then Kovar, and then Bob.
Why don't you go ahead, Councilmember Kovar, because I feel like I'm still trying to collect all of my questions and thoughts.
Well, I'll send these as a follow-up, but I'll just mention them now, and it may not be that they can be easily answered, but one of the things is not clear from the chart is the status of the $300,000 state capital grant. So that would be one thing that'd be helpful to know. The second thing is there's a line in the funding source section that talks about total funds available, and that's gone down by roughly $1 million in the chart, but presumably those funds have been used for the project, and the funds that were set aside for the project were to include not only construction, but some of the other things, including the design work, et cetera. So it would be helpful, again, this can be provided later, to get a clarification of what that difference is explained, how that difference is explained. And then in addition, the soft costs, maybe the soft costs have gone up for the same reason that the estimate on the construction costs have gone up, since a lot of the soft costs are about purchase of equipment, things like furniture and so on, but it'd be helpful to get a clarification on that point. And then additionally, the change in the construction contingency amount, it's substantially higher, higher as a percentage, I guess, than just would be explained by the increase in the estimated cost. And so that may be owing to the fact that with the volatile current situation in terms of the impact of inflation and the supply chain issues and the like, that maybe the recommendation is that that number should be higher. But those points, the state capital grants, what the money was spent on so far, the change in the soft costs, and why the construction contingency is higher. If we could, again, it doesn't have to be tonight, but if we could get separately an explanation for each of those things, that would be helpful.
Sure. So I think we can speak a bit to it now, Councilmember Kovar. In terms of the capital grants, so we did submit for those. And really the answer to that and the answer to the reduction in the bond reserve balance are really the same. And that's that it did cost us some money to get to this point, and most of that has been spent on design. So we can certainly break that out for you. And then in terms of the soft cost increases, so in the scenario that I showed this evening, they actually stay the same. But if you're referring to the difference between the December 2020 soft cost estimates to today, I think we underestimated some of the soft costs back in December 2020. Our total amount for furniture was a lot lower, given what we'll really need in reality. And I'm sure Director Jones would be happy to kind of break out what exactly the soft costs are, and that might be helpful to you. And then finally, with the construction contingency, that does include what's commonly called in construction contracts escalation to midpoint, which reflects, the margin for inflation or cost increases over the life of the project. And that's, increased proportionately with the cost of the project. So I don't know if Director Jones has any additional comments now, but we can certainly follow up with with the
But just,
details you're
thanks, just to
requesting.
go back to the first question, the design was in the original cost of the project. And so when setting aside the recent COVID-related COVID-connected inflation rate and so on, for the December 2020, the total funds that were available, some of those have been spent, but that was anticipated expenditures. But it seems, unless I'm misreading this chart, that amount has just been deducted from it, spent presumably, but that, it doesn't seem like that's accounted for exactly.
Sure. So like I said, we can break it out for you. I mean, the total design contract is 800,000. We've spent a little over 500,000 of that. And that is certainly part of it. And again, this has stretched, the bond was available, several years ago. So I think that goes back to the previous library director and invoices that she submitted, but we can certainly break that out.
But I guess what I'm saying is the design costs were always going to be part of the project, right?
Right, but I thought your first question spoke to why the 300,000 for state capital grants was zeroed out and why the bond reserve has been reduced from the original 7 million that we had. And the answer is that we've spent those amounts already.
Right, but those were anticipated to be spent, I guess is what I mean. So.
Right, I mean, the cost increase isn't, is partly due to that, but I mean, we have fewer funds available than we did at the beginning of the project.
Right, but because they've been spent on the project, right?
Right, and the cost of the project has increased significantly.
But it seems as if the new numbers are added to the available funds without taking into account what the original amount of funds that were available were. And maybe I should, maybe I'm not expressing myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we gave you a lot of information in one chart. I think we might even want to send you the Excel. It's a lot easier to add up. Sometimes when you're looking at the table, it looks like it doesn't add up, but we've quadruple checked this table. And if we had additional funding sources available,
I'm not suggesting that there's hidden dollars in the couch somewhere. I'm just trying to make sense of what the numbers are and figure out what was spent on what. So maybe if there is a more detailed chart, that would be helpful. Thank you.
All right. Then I have Councilman Costick, DeBala, and Smith, and then we're going to close out our meeting at 11 o'clock tonight.
So thank you very much for breaking this into a spreadsheet sort of format. It's helpful for me to look at. I do share the concerns that Councilmember Kovar raised with regard to just being able to look at the total expenditures on this project to date. And I understand why you're putting it in this format, because those are, bygones be bygones. We've already spent that money. But I do think it's helpful as we look at sort of the initial cost estimate and the increased amount to just understand where we were, what we've spent, and why we're here. And we haven't had a reduction in our funding sources, and that's what it looks like in a chart like this. We've had expenditures of our funding sources towards our goal of doing this project. So to me, it's that funding source part of this chart that is challenging, and maybe it needs another section that has kind of expenditures and deductions to date that would sort of help explain those things. The other question I had, and thank you for answering this by email earlier today, was about the chart showing a total of 12 million and the text talking about the 11.2 million. And so I just want to make sure, sort of in the same vein of understanding where we've been and the amounts that we've spent, I want to make sure that we're getting the picture of the total amount of money that this project will cost. So we're making the right decisions on where the funding comes from and how we spend the money and what we have left over and might need in the future. So just want to make sure that we're thinking not just 11.2 if we actually need those soft costs to be budgeted into ARPA or somewhere else, that we have those funds. And then finally, I had a question. I was kind of looking back at some of the other updates and documents, and in one of the previous updates, I want to say maybe it was in October, it was noted that when the estimate went up, there were some aspects that I think had been add alternates that were now figured into kind of the base bid. And the ones I noted down specifically then were, I think, the senior lounge and the Mac lab. And I'm just wondering if that plays a part in kind of the increase overall, if there are aspects like that that could potentially be reduced in cost, if we're looking to reduce some cost here. Is there still an option to kind of reconsider some of those add alternate things that we talked about previously?
Sure, there are, and I think that those are our next steps in the coming weeks. We're doing our construction manager, Bob Jones from Arcadis, is part of the team, and he was with us tonight. Are working with us to just identify any cost savings that we can find, as well as potentially phasing or doing bid alternates within the project. I think our goal right now, though, is to find any cost savings that would not require a resubmission of the permit, but rather would require a permit modification. And there's, you kind of have to toe the line between having bid alternates and redesigning the project, particularly because the library it's all interconnected. And so, for example, if you take out the recreation renovation portion, the egresses and in that part of the project impact the egress of the library building. So it can kind of have a ripple effect. And I remember, we had a lot of discussion back in December 2020 as to whether we should include bid alternates in this design, and we decided against it. Of course, that was before both council and staff knew that inflation would take off in the way that it has. But certainly we'll be looking at that in the coming weeks. And so I think it makes sense to keep, the total here in a hold position, and we'll have more information.
Okay. Councilman Dabala.
Thanks. And so he may no longer be with us, but welcome to the new construction manager. I'm really glad to have him as part of the team. I have some of the same questions that have already been raised. And earlier this afternoon, I sent in some specific questions about the numbers in the memo that we've been given. I would like to encourage considering alternate bid alternates that don't require a new permit. I'd like to hear more about that. I'd like to revisit the discussion in December 2020, not the whole discussion, just the piece about what some of the alternatives are that we identified in case we ran into the situation we're in, where we have a significant cost overrun. I would like to see this library built. I just want to make that clear. My questions have to do with ways to make reasonable changes that will help us get through this. And I have one more request, which I put in the note, which is I think we need to hear from staff. I think we need to ask staff to get creative about potential alternate sources of funding for some of these pieces before we tap into ARPA funds that have such high demand in such other areas. I don't know what those are, but that's why we have all of you. And rather than spend my time with, looking for a lot of specific details right now, the information you've suggested that you can send the detailed spreadsheet, et cetera, would be great. And then some of the numbers questions that have already been raised and that I raised in my note this afternoon. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
I just want to set expectations though for our process, because we don't, and we can revisit the library, but one of the things that we had talked about is putting whatever we want to, whatever that dollar amount considers on hold. We're not going to be able to review the library project. And because I personally don't want to hold up getting these ARPA dollars out to people in that time. So what we have talked about is putting this sort of these dollars for the library in kind of the secondary contingency bucket. So I just want to set expectations and what we're asking staff to do by next week, because we need to move on getting dollars out the door. And we are like 75% of this, or 80%, I think, in agreement with moving some of these funds. And so I want to make sure that we're not asking the staff to come in and do a whole presentation next week on the library. What we're going to do next week is go through this chart again, like we did 2 weeks last week, and decide what we're going to move forward with for the ARPA dollars next week. So I just want to make sure we still have redistricting to work on, and we need to make decisions about how we're spending the ARPA dollars.
I would just like to say that I was not proposing that there be a full briefing next week. I think there need to be one really soon. But I think some of these questions can be responded to within the next few days.
Okay. When you started talking, I just wanted to make sure, because I saw staff looking a little pale in terms of what was expected for next week. Councilmember Smith.
I would just like to say my position has been clear since this new iteration of the library started. I believe that, this is Fox and his staff have done everything in line of what they should do in this type of project. But in my opinion, it doesn't matter if we go through each line item. This project is going to cost a lot more money than initially proposed. And I think part of that is the inexperience that we have with major capital improvement projects. I think we're on like year 7 with this library. I would say the council that agreed $2.5 million anticipated that this library project would be much more than the initial amount that the council agreed to fund. And that is what is happening here. And we have not moved one piece of dirt. So if we say it's 10 million, 12 million, I don't even know what that number is going to be with this final project. And, the members of the council that support it have to, deal with that, because it is not going to be whatever the amount we come to agreement on this evening or a week from now. This project is going to be much more expensive than any of us anticipate.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to associate myself with Councilmember DeBala's statements. I think it's important that we get additional information. I think it's going to be, as you said, Mayor, far more than detailed information than we can get in 1 week. But I agree we should be moving forward with other pieces of the ARPA funding, in the near term, because we know that we do want to accomplish a lot of these things, and we do want to commit the dollars to that. And I see no problem with putting the library funding on hold until we can get answers to those questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. We have a few minutes left. Any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none. I think Deputy Director Clark sent out the what are we calling it, spreadsheet for folks to look at with additional information. So next week, again, we will have another work session where we will walk through this chart again and make some decisions and review the ordinance that staff will give us. If you can, I think it was helpful for Deputy City Manager Clark to, if you have a sense of where you think certain things need to move or what your chart is. I don't want to speak for your Deputy Manager Clark, but I think that was helpful in just you moderating the conversation last week to have that information ahead of time. So I just ask if people know, maybe send that to Ms. Clark ahead of time. Anything else?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if I can, I just want to just state just a few things. On behalf of staff, we appreciate Mayor and Council, your feedback this evening. It is going to be a lot of work that we have ahead to be able to put stuff together between now and next week. And I just ask for your patience with us and a little grace to be able to turn a lot of this around in the next several days. Secondly, I just want to address, so this evening, what our team presented tonight in the new proposal from staff is what I would call the bare minimum cuts. So next week when we come back and if there's any further cuts than what we have provided tonight, it would mean that some of those projects on the list is not even worth doing. So I just want you to just keep that in mind as you think about, and we come into next week, that we went to a level where we have a sense of comfort that we can actually meet and exceed and get those projects out into the community, that those dollars out into the community and the projects move forward. With that, I'll turn back over to you, Madam Mayor.
Great. Terrific. Well, thank you. Thank you for all your work on this. And we'll close the meeting before 11 o'clock. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.